Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Sanctuary of Shady Plains by Bella Brown. All rights reserved. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 1886. Wedding guests were gathered in small groups around the gardens. The joyful atmosphere was buzzing with chatter, sprinkled with a clink of glasses and the occasional bark of good-natured laughter. The June morning had begun damp and dewy, though it had soon melted away into the perfect summer afternoon. But then, one wouldn't expect anything less for a Hawkins wedding. The house had been decorated lavishly in white and red flowers that matched the ones that had decorated the church. A profusion of splendidness cascaded from doorframes and windows, balustrades and fireplaces, and all through the house was a scent of orange from the blossom leaves. The bride wore a fashionable dress of satin and brocade, the color of candle-glow ivory. A veil of white was pinned to the back of her dark, artfully arranged hair. The long bodice showed off her narrow waist and featured large buttons and was topped with a fancy bow of ribbon and lace. The slim overskirt gathered to meet a lavish train in a cascade of ruffles at the sides. "I do declare, I don't think I've seen a more generous wedding, Temperance," Beatrix Nash murmured in her best friend's ear. Temperance couldn't help the grin that spread over her face as she turned to look at her, her dark brown eyes glowing with happiness. "I'm afraid Papa has very much indulged my every wish to give me the perfect day." Beatrix touched her arm. The opposite of her friend, she was blonde with honey-colored skin and wide-set eyes. "As well he should, seeing as you're his only child. I'd say that pretty much anyone who's anyone from the Pittsburgh social elite is here today." Her blue eyes roamed the room. "If you weren't my oldest and dearest companion, I would be positively green with envy, especially considering the prize." Beatrix's eyes had come to rest upon Medlock Forsythe. Even from across the room, Temperance could feel that pull of attraction as she watched her new husband. He stood above the rest of his crowd and oozed confidence that made men stand a little taller and drew the admiring gaze of every female within a 10-block radius. "And he's mine." The thrill of those words shimmered through her. "I'm quite sure I shall wake up from this wondrous dream shortly and realize it was all a joke," she murmured languorously. "Nonsense," Beatrix tutted. "It's nothing short of what you deserve, dear friend. Do you think you'll stay in the family business now that you're married?" Temperance gave a delicate shrug. "I haven't thought of it, in all honesty, though I guess I will for now. We have several plans for new sites and the like. I don't suppose you've thought of much else beyond the wedding." Beatrix's eyes glinted wickedly as she lowered her voice. "Or the honeymoon." Temperance hushed her friend as they both giggled. Beatrix was a married lady herself, and so already had experience with men. She had always teased Temperance on her reticence to dally with the other gender, but as the sole heir to Garland Hawkins and his chain of hotels, she had always been the object of parental attention. After her coming-out party, her social calendar had been packed with a parade of unremarkable suitors. Medlock Forsythe had been different. He'd been aloof in his approach and wooing style, yet his unflinching gaze had all but set her alight. He'd taken his time and courted her properly. She'd been incredibly flattered that a man such as he would be interested in a lady like herself when he could have had his pick of the city belles. "What are you two giggling about?" "Oh, Mama!" Laughter danced in Temperance's dark eyes as she touched a gloved hand to her mother's arm. "We were just being silly." "Well, I suppose if you can't be silly with your girlfriends, then there's something wrong. Sweetheart, you should go and say hello to the Singletons. They're here in town and have made a special effort to come and see your father." Temperance wrinkled her nose to Beatrix, who was now so used to having her friend need to make the social rounds when at parties. She nodded as Temperance excused herself. She followed her mother across the room, and before long, had joined in the conversations with other men who were known associates of her father's. Having grown up in the hotelier industry, she was au fait with the language that was used and enjoyed engaging in sparring debates with other hotel representatives. Before long, she felt that pull, that basic thrill of desire, and became aware of Medlock's gaze resting on her. She smiled shyly at him, knowing that tonight she would become his wife in every sense of the word. She was both exhilarated and scared at the same time. He held her gaze as he weaved his way past their other guests, and her smile grew. He curled his fingers around her bicep and squeezed. "Excuse us, gentlemen," he murmured, and guided her away from the room. He pulled the glass from her hand and set it onto the sideboard in the hallway, and then propelled her towards the front door. "Medlock, where are you taking me?" She laughed and tried to extricate her arm. He remained wordless as he opened the front door. She looked at his profile and sniggered. "Medlock, wait, we have guests. We can't leave." Her mind was delirious at her husband's desire to get her alone, but she had a duty towards her guests and her father's reputation. She tried to resist him once more as he hurried her along. She stumbled down the front steps onto the street at his urging, and he caught her neatly, his fingers digging deep as he pulled her to meet his hard body. "Medlock, ouch, you're hurting my arms," she gasped and pulled in vain against his hold. Her brow was knitted together in annoyance as she looked up into his face. His eyes, normally so intense and rousing, glittered down at her from a mask she didn't recognize. "You're mine now." Chapter 1. 2 years later, 1888. "You're very quiet this evening, my dear." Temperance jumped at the sudden sound of her husband's voice. Before he'd spoken, only the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the clink of cutlery tapping the china could be heard. She'd relaxed a little after he'd inspected the plate of food that she'd made, and had given his curt nod in approval. She'd then taken her seat to his left. She'd murmured her prayer with him, and adding a silent prayer to keep her family safe and whole. Though she didn't dare speak these words out loud, she swallowed as a frisson of fear trickled through her. She'd inspected the room vigilantly for dust and dirt before he'd walked in. Had she missed something? He'd picked the dining table and chairs, the drapes, the neat rug that the table rested on. He'd selected the pictures of art that adorned the walls. The wooden floor gleamed richly in the light from the lamps. The dark mahogany of the dining table was like a polished mirror, though they hadn't entertained any guests for dinner in almost a year. She gave him a smile, peeling back her lips gingerly in case it opened up the cut there once more. "I didn't mean to be," she replied, her tone gentle. "You've done well with this meal." He set down his fork and picked up his water glass. Temperance held her breath as he lifted the glass to check for smears in the light. "The tiny onions aren't as nice as the ones I ate at the restaurant in New York last month, though." She nodded, and her eyes dropped to her meal. Her appetite was wan at the best of times, but now everything tasted like dust. Still, she mechanically speared up a piece of meat and put it into her mouth. He wouldn't like it if she didn't eat what his money had earned for her. "I told you we didn't need that idiot cook in the kitchen," he said and sipped his drink. The sound of the glass being set down against the wood was like a gunshot to her stretched nerves. Temperance bobbed her head. "Yes, husband, you were right." The young cook was a talented woman who'd arrived with excellent references from another grand house in New York. She was the 5th one they'd had in their 2-year marriage, and Medlock had dismissed her for burning a meat pie. Petra Hawkins had insisted that her daughter hire a housekeeper. The woman had lasted less than 6 months before she'd handed in her notice. Nowadays, Temperance ran their modest townhouse by herself. If she had seen her mother in the past 18 months, no doubt she would be horrified with the knowledge that her only daughter was scrubbing her own floors. Medlock set his cutlery down with a clatter, and the sound jarred her. He cleared his throat and dabbed at the corners of his mouth with his napkin before dropping the cloth into a plateful of gravy. Temperance caught the action and knew that she would need to soak it to remove the stain that it was going to leave. She remained mute and dropped her gaze. He cleared his throat, and she felt the instant his focus was on her, as all her nerve endings screamed into awareness of him. The sensation used to thrill her. Now it braced her, almost as a built-in defense mechanism. With a small smile in a serene face, she kept chewing methodically, even as her stomach threatened to heave its contents. She breathed out and gave him an understanding nod. "Of course, Medlock, as you wish." His eyes remained passive as he contemplated her, taking in her marred skin as his tongue moved around his teeth to scrape off any remaining food. He sucked in air through his teeth as he did so. "Temperance, this was your fault. It is your marital duty to provide me with a child. You and your insipid nature means that I deserve a son. Why won't you give me a child?" Temperance bowed her head. "I'm sorry, Medlock. I don't know what else to say. I've tried everything I can, and I pray every night that God may bless this home, a good home that you provide for me." Tear-filled eyes implored him to understand that she was doing her best to make him happy. He pushed up to his feet, his hands braced on the table as he loomed over her. Dark eyes flashed with displeasure, and Temperance naturally recoiled from him. He pressed a kiss to her lowered head, then murmured into her ear, "Then try harder." Temperance hated Saturdays. Those were the days that Medlock was around the house all day. She knew that some couples took a stroll out in the sunshine to enjoy a local park. Some visited one of the many events in the city. Some visited with friends. Before her marriage, she used to indulge in these pastimes with Beatrix or her mother. She would have enjoyed a little retail therapy in the city. There was almost always a party or a social gathering happening. Sometimes Garland would accompany her. These days, her life was vastly different. At least on weekdays, Medlock was out at his office and she was safe in the knowledge that she had a few hours to complete her chores in relative peace before he would return home. However, on Saturdays, Medlock stayed home. He would read in the drawing room. Occasionally, he would work in the office. Temperance would have to go about her daily tasks in silence. Sometimes she wouldn't even know what had upset him, and she would end up in the basement, locked away and bloody. Other times, he would make fun of her and humiliate her clumsiness. That's why she hated Saturdays. She just wouldn't know what was coming next. Today, he was in his office. She crept about the house, trying not to disturb him, which was why she heard it. At first, Temperance didn't recognize the sound that made her straighten up. She was polishing the brass and had the items laid out on the kitchen table. It was dirty, smelly work, but it meant that she would be quiet. Then she heard it again, and her heart began to knock against her chest. Someone was knocking on the front door. She quickly racked her brain on the date. It was March. There was nothing in their calendar, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Had she made a mistake? Her feet felt weighed down with dread as she quickly wiped her hands and hurried down the long hallway to the front door. "Mama!" Temperance cried as she opened the door. She was stopped from throwing her arms around her mother when she caught her look of horror. "Goodness me, Temperance, what are you wearing?" Her joy at seeing her mother was stamped back when she remembered Medlock's words of warning to her. She glanced down at her ragged dress, recalling the grand outfits that Medlock had confiscated so that she wouldn't be able to leave the house when he wasn't home. Temperance laughed and waved a dismissive hand. "I'm cleaning the brass, Mama. I don't want to ruin my nice dresses now, do I?" Petra Hawkins gaped at her child. "Why are you cleaning the brass? Where's your maid?" Temperance heard the footfall behind her and spun, pasting a bright smile on her face as she looked to her husband. "Look, Medlock, Mama has made a house call." He oozed charm as his handsome face split for a grin, and he stepped forward. "Petra, what a delight." Prosody rate plus 7%. Temperance, don't just let your poor mother stand in the cold on the street like a pauper. Let her in. Temperance moved, and Petra stepped inside, her eyes roaming the space as she did so. She shrugged off her coat, and Temperance took it. "Forgive my manners, Mama. I'm just surprised to see you. Are you in town for long?" Petra removed her gloves. "Well, darling, seeing as I've not seen you in over a year, and you've not replied to any of my correspondence for the last 3 months, I thought I would come and see my only daughter for myself." Temperance hadn't had any letters from her mother for months, and she then knew that Medlock must have intercepted them. She kept her voice even. "Sorry, Mama, I've just been so busy." "Petra, come on through and let's catch up." Medlock swept his arm towards the room. "How's Garland?" The older woman arched a thin brow at her son-in-law, but allowed herself to be led. The drawing room was simple and functional. The fireplace was dark wood and ornate, and the fire was neatly set to be lit. Tall windows had heavy, dark red drapes framing them with corded ties that held them open. The gleaming wooden floor was broken up by a vibrant colored rug in front of the fire that has the seating arranged around it. Petra looked about the room as she took a seat on the love seat. "Garland is fine, Medlock, missing his daughter." Her tone implied that she wasn't impressed. "Though why you moved this far away from civilization, I'll never know. That's why I'm here today. It's your father's birthday next month, and we're throwing a party. You missed it last year, and I wanted to make sure that the invitation was delivered in person, seeing as you don't seem inclined to respond to any of my letters." She lifted the fancy-looking envelope from her reticule and set it on her lap. Medlock chuckled, though Temperance caught the bouncing muscle that ticked in his jaw and knew that his temper was simmering. She interrupted his response. "Mama, can I get you some refreshments?" Petra patted the chair. "Come, sit here, and let me see you. Let me drink you in to refill my cup. Your housekeeper can bring us our drinks whilst we catch up." "Oh," Temperance twisted her hands into a knot. "Mama, we don't have any staff, Petra. We're perfectly capable of fetching things and clearing up after ourselves." Medlock's tone was clipped, even though he was chortling. "We don't need any slaves to do our bidding for us." Petra looked suitably horrified. "No staff? A cook at least, surely?" "Mama, please, this is how we choose to live our lives." Temperance smiled wanly. "Now, let me make some tea and we can catch up properly. You can tell me everything that has been going on." At her mother's nod, Temperance left the room and hurried down the hall. Anxiety made her hands shake as she set the kettle on the stovetop and busied herself adding tea leaves to the pot. She knew that Medlock would be the epitome of the polite son-in-law, as he always was, but she had lied in the letters to her mother to try and deflect the questions about Temperance's sudden disappearance from society, withdrawing from the family business and cutting everyone she loved out of her life. She just hoped that one of those lies wasn't exposed by accident during their conversation. She whirled as she heard the footsteps behind her, and had to school her expression to one of serenity as she saw Petra in the doorway. Petra frowned at her strange reaction. "I thought I would come and explore your house. It's quite charming." She glanced down the hallway before pushing the door closed. She took in her daughter, and her face softened. Wordlessly, she crossed to Temperance. She put her arms around her and held her close. "I've missed you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Temperance allowed herself a moment to accept the hug. The first touch of tenderness she'd had in so long, she'd almost forgotten the comfort of it. She rolled her lips to keep from blurting out everything to her mother, for she knew that her mother had not wanted her to marry Medlock in the first place. But the headstrong Temperance had pushed to get her way. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lay in it and deal with her decisions. She felt the sting of her tears and pulled back, rubbing a hand down her mother's arm. "It's good to see you," she replied in a loud voice, knowing that her husband would no doubt be lingering outside to eavesdrop. "How's Papa? How's business?" Petra gave her a nod in understanding as she glanced at the door. She began to assist with making the tea as Temperance added cookies to a pretty plate. "Oh, you know your father, as busy as always. He's adding another site to the business, which will bring us up to 5 now," Petra grumbled, even though Temperance knew her mama to be as keen on expansion as her father was. "Now, tell me about you. How's life?" Temperance kept the conversation light and cheerful, lamenting on being too ill over the winter months to be active socially, which, whilst a fabrication, at least corroborated with what she guessed Medlock was telling people. The afternoon passed quickly, and her husband was charming and delightful with her mother. Petra, at least, had appeared pacified by his gracious actions. Petra left with the assurance that they would be at Garland's birthday party the following month. As soon as the front door was closed, Temperance felt the loss of her mother's company keenly. She had missed her very much, and the afternoon had passed by in a blur as her mother regaled her with stories of their friends and the scandalous gossip that seemed to be perpetuated by their group. Medlock's hand was on the front door still when he said over his shoulder, "Did you plan this?" Chapter 2. Temperance swallowed at the lethal tone. "No, I was as surprised as you to see her here." "Rubbish," he bit out as his eyes met hers in the dim hallway. "It's too convenient. How did you let her know you would be here to receive her today? Who else are you speaking to? Someone must have arranged this." "No one," she gasped. "I don't leave the house unless I'm with you, Medlock." Fear rolled around her stomach. She probably guessed we'd both be home on a Saturday, as it's too cold. "Don't lie to me," he bellowed, and she stepped back. "I'm not. I wouldn't," she said in a rush. "I moved us to this house so that your interfering family wouldn't be hovering around me so much, offering me their charity with job vacancies and the like. I know what people said when we got married, that I only married you because your family was wealthy. That isn't true," she tried to placate him. As he advanced on her, she backed up a few steps but couldn't move far within the narrow space. "I don't need your pity. That's probably the only reason someone would marry you, because it certainly wasn't for your looks," he sneered as he towered over her. Temperance could feel herself retreating into her mind as his words struck home. She had once been the envy of her friends and had been described as beautiful. She was certainly indulged lots by her parents. She had been so happy on her wedding day, yet struggled now to recall why, as his vitriol spilled over her head. "We shall go to this wretched party, if only to pacify your stupid mother. And after that, we're moving again, farther away this time, where your family won't be able to find you." She looked at him and gasped. "But Medlock, I don't want to leave my family. I didn't want to move here. My mother, I'm her only child." She saw as his restraint broke and wished that she could stuff the words back into her mouth. She pressed herself to the wall and waited, for she knew what was coming next. Temperance listened for the door lock to click into place before she released her breath. She tiptoed to the door and paused. She'd once made the mistake of believing Medlock had left for the day and had made a pithy comment about him. He'd still been stood in the hallway and had heard her. She'd not been able to sit properly for a week at that time. Today, though, she heard his retreating steps and his voice calling out to the driver as he climbed into the cab, waiting at the curb. He liked to keep up the appearance in the neighborhood that he had a decent and affluent lifestyle. He seemed to enjoy dropping in the Hawkins Hotel connection in conversations, yet made mean comments about her family when they were alone. Temperance sighed. She had given up trying to figure out the enigma that her husband was long ago. She moved towards the drawing room, her steps awkward and slow, and knew that she must go about her chores as if nothing was wrong. Medlock hated more than anything to be reminded that he'd hurt her, and simply blamed her poor behavior for making him do it to her when she flinched or gasped in pain. The watery March sunshine shone through the wide window, and her eyes were drawn through it, looking at the light refracting through the rain droplets on the glass. Winter was retiring for another year, and spring was on its way. Once upon a time, she would be beginning to reply to parties now and plan her social calendar for the summer season. She could see her life spiraling out in front of her, the years yawning before her like a black chasm, and she was teetering on the precipice. Only, she daren't look down in case she fell into it. Seeing her mother yesterday had brought up feelings of loss and loneliness that she'd pushed down. She should have said something to her mother, asked her for help, given a warning that her life was… what? She had a roof over her head, food in her belly, a husband. Medlock was always telling her that she was luckier than most. She couldn't leave him. The shame that it would bring down on her family didn't bear thinking about. If only she could have a child. Then he would let up. He would be happy. He would finally hold her and love her like he'd sworn to do so on their wedding day. He was yet to treat her gently and kindly. She lifted a hand, bruised to a bright purple, as she'd tried to shield herself last night, and looked at the marks. If he could do that to her, what would he do to a child who would cry at night? Parentheses. Shamed at the thoughts that rolled through her, she closed her eyes and tears trickled unchecked down her cheeks. She felt hopeless, a ship cast adrift in life, and even though she'd not been allowed to set foot in a church during their marriage, she did what always brought her comfort. She prayed. She prayed for the strength to be able to endure whatever Medlock handed out. She prayed for the answer as to why God had put her here, for the lesson that she needed to learn to be revealed soon, and she prayed that Medlock would open his heart to the Lord and learn to love, to cherish, to be kind. The words soothed her heart, and she opened her eyes, renewed with the strength that she pulled from her faith. She needed to get on with her day. His breakfast items were carefully placed on the wide dining table. His newspaper was folded up alongside it. As she reached out for the napkin on the tray, a searing pain sliced through her ribs, and she grabbed her side with a cry, knocking the teacup as she did so. The cold contents sloshed over the rim. "Oh, no." She breathed as the wet stain expanded over the paper. She tried to mop it up as best as she could, knowing that he would want to finish reading it when he returned tonight. She scooped it up and hobbled towards the kitchen, where she could spread open the pages to dry them in front of the stove. Maybe she could dry them before he returned home. She certainly couldn't go out to buy a replacement, nor did she want to send someone to fetch another one. If he found out that she'd been outside or even spoken to someone, she left the sheets out to dry and made a start on the chores. She emptied the fires in the bedroom and the drawing room and set them again. She dusted and polished the furniture, ironed the bedding, and made the beds so that the blanket edges were folded neat and tidy. Progress was hindered by her injured body protesting at any movement, and by the time she returned to the kitchen, a thin layer of sweat beaded her upper lip. She prepared the vegetables for their supper and finally sat in the kitchen with a whooshing exhale. She spotted the newspaper sheets that had dried nicely from the warmth of the fire in the stove, and she growled at her forgetful mind. She stood up once more and began to carefully place the sheets back into the correct order. Her eyes scanned the articles as she did so, and she read a few of them with interest. Reminiscing of a time when she'd chatted about finance and business with her papa and his business partners. On more than one occasion, she had been sent into a meeting first to butter up a potential investor with her wit and charm. It had disarmed most businessmen to deal with a woman, and Garland seemed to enjoy the disconcerting effect it had on people. She was lining up the edges when she saw the job advertisements. Hawking's hotel chain was advertising for its new premises, and a smile touched her mouth. Even now, she felt pride in her family business. Her father had built it up from the ground, winning his initial investment in a card game. Its business acumen had meant that the company had flourished under his guidance, and he'd bucked the trend and had been proud that his child had shown an interest in the business. Her fingertips stroked the printed paper as she traced the H. She was hit with a wave of longing. She wondered what had been said as her parents had shared their evening meal last night, what her mother had made of the unusual arrangements of their only child. She had seemed to accept the explanation of Temperance being able to manage the house on her own at face value, and that having staff was simply an old-fashioned way that Medlock and she didn't want. She wondered what her parents would say if they knew that Medlock had either fired and threatened staff until they just left. Her eyes carried on scanning the newspaper, stopping when she had to reread one of the advertisements. Managers, chambermaids, housekeepers, cooks. We need you. Our company has many job vacancies for businesses expanding and building on the frontier. Excellent rates of pay with benefits. All year sunshine. Come find yourself in the West. Colorado, California, Texas. Write to our office with your skills and we will match you to one of the many businesses looking for staff. Don't hesitate. The address of the office given was one in Pittsburgh. She thought the idea was a good one, an agency to match those people looking for work. She wondered if her father had maybe thought about doing such a thing. She could certainly fill one of the roles. She had worked as a chambermaid when her father had been building his second hotel. They'd been short-staffed, and her father believed that in order to understand the business and to be able to run it, you had to work in it from the ground up. Temperance snuffled out a laugh. She remembered thinking back then that the work had been hard. Had I known then what I know now? For just a second, she thought about writing to the offices, of running, of moving far away from Medlock. But where would she go? How would she get the replies past him? She didn't even have any clothes in which to be seen outside in. The front door slammed shut, and she heard Medlock's steps on the floorboards. She quickly finished stacking the sheets and folded the newspaper, setting it to one side, and then she busied herself finishing their dinner. Her husband slept soundly beside her. his snores reverberating through his chest in a rumble that gave her some comfort. He couldn't hurt her when he was asleep. Temperance lay on her back, staring through the darkness. She'd been quiet all evening, more quiet than normal. Not because she was too scared of Medlock. She knew that he would want her injuries to heal before the party next month. Sleep eluded her, her mind whirred in a myriad of images of mountains and sunshine and freedom. Whilst she knew that her life was here, in her mind, she was able to take herself far away. That was her one saving grace. The next morning, after Medlock had left once more for the office, Temperance set about her daily chores. As she set the fire in the drawing room, she rolled up the newspaper sheets, twisting them, and carefully stacked them so that when they were lit, they would burn evenly. As she pulled out the one sheet, she saw the advert for Hawkins Hotel, for the office that was advertising for the jobs. She hesitated, holding the paper out in front of her as indecision spun out. Where would she go? How would she do it? Her eyes moved to the ring of bruises around her wrist from where he'd lost his temper last night over the missing text from his paper that the spilled drink had destroyed. Without another thought, Temperance tore the advert from the paper. She crossed to the bookcase and pulled out a Charles Dickens book and tucked the advert into the pages. Chapter 3. From her vantage point at the side of the room, Temperance was able to watch the party guests who were gathered into clutches without interruption. Her father's birthday parties were almost legendary now, and most of the elite in Pittsburgh and some from New York were in attendance, dressed in their finery. All around her was noise and bustle, laughter, glasses clinking, and the hubbub that accompanied an event such as this. She had been a little overwhelmed, for as soon as she had stepped down from the carriage, she had been swallowed into the throng of well-wishers who exclaimed over her absence from the social scene. She wasn't used to it, the constant barrage of questions, then having to think and edit what she was saying, lest she say something wrong to ignite the temper of her husband. It had drained her. Medlock had been snagged by fellow associates of her family, though Temperance felt his eyes on her constantly, and eventually she began to feel faint as a dull headache formed at the base of her skull. She had moved to the side of the room to escape, yet remain where he could see her. She had worn a beautiful green satin dress that had a bodice and a bustle that set off her tiny waist. Her collarbone was thrown into stark contrast in her pale skin, and she knew that she must have lost a little weight since she had last dressed up. She'd taken her time to pin her dark hair up carefully so that some of the weight dropped onto her shoulders to try and hide this. Beatrix plopped down into the seat next to hers and huffed out a breath. "Your father has done it again." She fanned herself with a gloved hand. "This party will be the talk of the season." Temperance smiled at her good friend, having already had a grilling as to where she had been hiding for the past year. "I think it's his specialty. It's so good to see you." She touched a hand to Temperance's forearm and frowned when her friend automatically flinched from the action. She remained forward, with her elbows resting on her knees as she pinned her friend with a look. "Your mother was right," she declared as Temperance studiously avoided making eye contact with her friend. "How so?" "She said you'd lost weight, and that you were either sick or scared." Temperance met her gaze fleetingly before they slid across the room to where Medlock stood in a group. "I'm fine," she murmured. "And I'm a goose." Temperance couldn't help the smile that tugged at her mouth as the tart tone. "You're as noisy as a goose. There, and thank goodness." Beatrix nodded. "My Temperance is still in there somewhere, so that's good to know. No one has seen you in months. What's going on?" "Nothing. I'm okay," Temperance replied calmly as unease rippled through her. She wasn't comfortable lying and knew that if anyone would see through a ruse, it would be Beatrix. She had been so excited and happy for the past month over seeing her family and friends. She breathed and dreamed about getting dressed up and seeing people, yet now she was here. She was a bundle of nerves in case she did something to set Medlock off. Hadn't he dragged her from her own wedding party? Why wouldn't he do the same, tonight? She had to ensure that she didn't do anything to cause him to force her to leave. She tried to head her friend off. "Tell me what's been happening with you." Beatrix arched her brow as she considered her. Her gaze followed Temperance's as she eyed her husband from across the room. "Nice try on the subject change. Come with me." She took Temperance's hand and pulled her to her feet. They had just made it to the door when Medlock stepped into their path. "And just where are you two running off to?" Temperance stiffened up, though she smiled at her husband. "I'm afraid I'm feeling a little faint. I need some fresh air. I didn't want to bother you whilst you were talking. I'm happy to accompany you." "Oh, Medlock," Beatrix laughed gaily, loud enough to draw the attention of several people in the vicinity. "I think I can manage a walk around the garden with my best friend now. Besides, you men are all talking and it's quite tiresome. Leave us girls to enjoy the flowers." Temperance worried at her lower lip as she saw his jaw tighten at such a flippant tone. But he stepped back, knowing he couldn't do much without causing a scene. She was led from the room out into the cool evening air. Beatrix waited until they were far enough from the house and found the small ornate wooden bench that her mother had cited to view the garden from the most favorable angle. They could hear the chatter still, though now muted, and the pleasant tinkling of a wind chime from somewhere in one of the trees. Her parents' house was a grand affair, with a wide porch that surrounded it and a broad portico entrance over both the front and back. It was as opulent and impressive as one of the Hawkins hotels. "Right," Beatrix muttered quietly. "Out with it. Don't try and feed me the 'I'm fine' line again, because frankly, Miss Hawkins, I don't believe you. I felt you freeze as soon as he got near you. Make it quick, because I have a feeling that he's watching us." Temperance felt it too, that tingling, sinking feeling. She felt the urge to confide, to share, to feel the release of confessing, but how could she? The shame alone would surely make her curl up into a ball. She worried at the inside of her mouth until she felt the sting of where her teeth had cut the cheek, and she tasted the metallic tang of blood. "Temperance," Beatrix hissed at her, "I know that something is wrong with you. You haven't been out on the social scene in ages. You look positively ghostly, and your smile no longer reaches your eyes. Is he responsible for this?" "Please, Beatrix," she whispered, her head dropping as her tears began to track down her cheeks. "He's my husband. I can't speak about what happens in the home. It's a home that he pays for." "He's my husband," she repeated. "And James is my husband," Beatrix hissed back. "I haven't changed. Do you see any other woman as broken as you are in there? They're wives too. This isn't right." Temperance raised her eyes to the rooms of the house, glowing against the twilight as day gave way to the night. She did feel like a ghost, a shadow in a room full of vibrant butterflies. Still, fear had a hold of her throat. She longed to tell her friend, but wouldn't that mean more pain? "Your mother said you are cleaning and doing everything in the house for yourself, that the place you live in is nice, but your neighbors said to her that they never saw you." Temperance looked up in surprise. Her mother had been spying? Somewhere deep inside, she knew that it would be true. Her mother would surely walk over hot coals for her child. "Does he beat you?" After a pause, Temperance gave a brief nod. "Often?" Another nod. "What else?" "He has my clothes, so I can't leave," she whispered, her eyes closing as the shame swamped her. "Sometimes I can't eat as it hurts. I can't speak to people as he doesn't like it. He wants me to have a child, and I've tried, and I've prayed, but I can't get it right. I just need to try harder to make him happy." Beatrix's nostrils were pinched as she inhaled. "None of this is your fault, Temperance. You need to leave him. I can help you." "Where would I go?" Temperance lifted her shoulder. "He's already said he'll never let me go. I'm sure he would rather see me dead than away from him. My parents don't need the scandal of me leaving my husband either." "If you stay, you're as good as dead too," Beatrix murmured. "There has to be a way out." Temperance recalled the advert. "I've thought about it," she confessed quietly, her eyes darting towards the house as she spoke. "There was a post in the Herald, the paper that he reads. Jobs are going on the frontier. Do you think that that would be far enough away?" Beatrix swallowed as she looked at her friend. She shuffled closer to her and put an arm around her. "The West? How would I cope if you were all the way out there?" Temperance snuffled out a laugh. "It was a silly idea anyway. I have no money, no clothes, and he has been intercepting the letters that my mother sent. He would know. You know, I really don't know how your mother does it. Her garden is quite divine. Even in this low light, she's quite the inspiration," Beatrix declared, and gave her arm an imperceptible squeeze. "Tell me, Temperance, is your garden in your new home as delightful as this?" Temperance knew instantly that they were being watched. She kept her eyes straight ahead and picked up on Beatrix's lead. "No, Bea, I'm afraid I don't have her green fingers, more's the pity. Are you feeling better now?" She lifted her arm away and rubbed her friend's arm. She didn't know where her husband was in the garden, or how much of the conversation he'd overheard, but her skin was tingling. Nausea twisted her insides as she stood up. "Much, thank you. I think the fresh air has helped," and the two ladies strolled back towards the house, Beatrix's inane chatter passing over Temperance's head unheeded as she tried to recall what she'd said, or if he'd heard any of it. Through the darkness, through the trees, gleaming blue eyes tracked their progress as they stepped into the light. Chapter 4. Campbell Drake's green gaze swept the street as he stepped out onto the boardwalk. His eyes were drawn to the horizon, where the green spruce trees nestled against the enduring gray mountains like the hem of a skirt. He inhaled the fresh mountain air and felt his frazzled temperament ease a little. It was late on in the day, yet there were still a few buggies dotted about on the dusty street. Cam settled his hat on his head and struck out across the road, lifting a hand to acknowledge one of the cowhands who was loading up a wagon outside the mercantile store. The day had been an unseasonably warm one, and there was a listless draft of air that eddied the dust around his boots, so that by the time he entered the general store, sweat was starting to trickle down his back. "Hey there, Cam," Eddie Wilkes, the store owner, called out. Campbell nodded his greeting and waited patiently as his friend finished up with his customer. He collected up a couple of items he needed, listening to the gossip that his friend was indulging in. "One of these days that tongue of yours is going to get you in trouble," Campbell remarked as the door closed behind the last customer. He set his items on the counter. Eddie chuckled. "I see it as my job to telegraph the news in these parts, as well as to keep the town well stocked up." "And do you spread my gossip?" Eddie's eyes rolled as he crossed to the back wall. "It's funny that you think your life is exciting enough to warrant gossip." He collected the mail out of the slot and crossed back to the counter. "Is the hotel busy?" Cam lifted a shoulder. "About half booked. Though I'm not sure I can handle it being busier. I can barely do everything as it is. I don't suppose there are any replies to that advert we did." Eddie slicked through the post and shook his head. "Nothing yet, though it's only been a couple of weeks. I thought it was a good idea at the time. Now I'm thinking that I should have just kept looking locally. There must be someone suitable who needs a job." "Are things that bad since Claire left?" Campbell's lips thinned at the mention of his chambermaid's name. She had left him in the lurch when she had disappeared in the middle of the night, along with one of the cowhands from one of the local homesteaders' place and some of his coin. "Not bad. I just need 10 pairs of hands." He owned one of the 2 hotels in the town. Nestled in the state of Montana, the town of Shady Plains boasted a stagecoach station, which brought a lot of transient business to the town and a small but steady stream of income. It had sprung up around a trading post, linking railways and stagecoach lines. "What you need is a wife," Eddie commented as he rested his forearms on the countertop and waggled his brows. Cam laughed off the comment, unwilling to enter the familiar discussion with his friend as the pang of pain ebbed dully. At least his loss wasn't as acute as it once was. "I had a wife, Eddie. What I need is the staff, decent staff who don't abscond on the promise of a wink and a whim." "See?" Eddie threw his arms wide as he straightened. "No gossip with you when you won't even discuss the fairer sex. All work and no play make for a boring life." Cam collected his belongings, stacked them carefully as he shot Eddie a grin. "All work pays the bills, no play means no drama, and that's just how I like it." Eddie Wilkes shook his head as he watched Campbell stalk from the store. Ever since Beth had passed on, Campbell had been trying to hold his life together. He happened to know from a reliable source that Cam had turned down several offers of companionship from available females, and in this area of Montana, that was rare in itself. Campbell Drake was as tall as he was broad, classically handsome, and clever to boot. Eddie had contemplated putting an advert for the position of a wife for him, but then knew that if he did interfere to that extent, Cam would surely beat his behind to the middle of next week. Eddie sighed and went back to his book. Campbell tried to shake off the irritation that Eddie's teasing had caused as he walked back to his hotel. He ignored the half-finished signage that clung precariously to the front of his building, as it would only add fuel to his simmering irritation. When he and Beth had arrived in Shady Plains, they'd been following the crowd in the search of a new life. However, they'd quickly run out of money, and Campbell had been forced to seek work on one of the ranches, though had soon discovered he was not cowboy material. Horses seemed to despise him, and he was better with people than cattle. After Beth had received a small inheritance from her aunt, they'd been able to cobble enough together to secure a loan from the bank to buy the hotel. They'd even extended it into the building that abutted it. But then Beth had gotten sick. He'd believed that she would recover, that it was just a cold. Only she hadn't got better. His most overriding feeling after she'd passed away was shock. He was left with a hotel that he'd been inexperienced of. Campbell had looked after the maintenance. Beth had been the one who'd organized everything, from the linen and laundry to the bookings and the money. These days, he knew that he just fudged his way through it all. Cam stepped inside and pushed the door to behind him. The interior of the hotel could be described by some as quaint, though that would be being generous. Nothing in the interior had changed in the years since his dear wife had departed. Beth had wanted him to update it. Campbell was resistant to try and change anything that didn't work until he'd had to acknowledge that most of the building now needed work. One of his guests was currently sat in the area that he'd labeled the library, simply because he had lined one wall with bookcases. The guest looked pointedly at the cold and empty hearth and then back at Cam. He nodded back and sent up a silent prayer that someone please answer his advert. He didn't know how much longer he could last like this. Temperance stood in the narrow hallway. Indecision rooted her to the spot. She could see the outline of the person who'd knocked through the glass in the front door. No one ever called here during the day. She'd have sworn she'd imagined the sound until the knocking was heard again, more insistent each time. It may be a test, she thought. Medlock might have stepped up his surveillance of her. "Temperance," Beatrix called to her, "I see you standing there. Let me in." On a gasp, she hurried to the door and cracked it open, only for Beatrix to slide through the opening on a laugh. But not before Temperance had caught her husband. James stood at the front gate next to a carriage. "Bea, what are you doing here?" "I'm on a mission." Her eyes twinkled. "I have to be quick. James is keeping an eye out." "Are your neighbors terribly nosy?" "I'm truly hoping not." Temperance grew self-conscious of her simple attire as her friend's gaze slid down. She had on gray skirts that were stained and soiled, with a black shirt, and her hair was tied up in a rag. She automatically reached up to try and cover the yellowing bruise on her jaw, but was too late as Beatrix was staring at it. "I don't know the neighbors," she murmured. "What are you doing here? Medlock will be furious." "He doesn't have to know." "I've come to tell you news." Temperance wasn't sure what news she could possibly have to share that was so important Beatrix would seek her out, but having her best friend here in her home served to cause her nothing but stress. "You must leave. I don't mean to be rude, but if he finds out..." Beatrix produced a letter. "Listen, I cannot see you like this any longer. Your mother and I have been busy planning your escape." "I can't. Wait. What?" "Here." Beatrix unfolded the letter. "I found that advert you mentioned at your father's party the other week. I saw the way he manhandled you out of there that night. And I don't even want to hazard a guess as to what happened when he got you home." Temperance's mind flashed back to the journey home, the stinging words he flung at her as he'd pressed to know what they'd been discussing. She'd been relieved when she realized that he'd not heard what she'd said, but he'd known that she was holding back on him. He'd locked her in the basement for 3 days when they'd returned home before he'd pulled her out of there. He'd then made her watch him burn her dresses in the fire, including the beautiful green one she'd worn. "Read." Beatrix pressed the paper into her hand when she didn't move. "Temperance, read it." She blinked to bring her mind back to the present. She began to read the flowing script of the first line. "What did you do?" She lifted a shocked expression to meet Beatrix's smiling face. "I replied to the advert. Of course, I used a false name. That way he cannot find you. There's a hotel in Montana looking for a housekeeper. of sorts. It's some tiny town away from the hustle-bustle of the city. It doesn't even have a train station there. He's replied to me at my home address. Medlock can't intercept my post. The job is yours if you want it, Temperance. I can't. Beatrix took hold of her hands. You cannot stay here. Look at you. You're dressed in rags and scared of your own shadow. You have a ticket on the train that leaves tomorrow from New York. Now, James and I are staying locally tonight, and we will be here as soon as Medlock leaves for work in the morning. We have to stop by the office to pay the advert man his fee. We should make the train, which means you'll be on your way and out of the state by the time Medlock gets home tomorrow night. No, I mean I can't go. He burned all of my clothes after Papa's party. He said I was never leaving the house again, as I couldn't be trusted. He knew that we were plotting something that night. I have nothing to wear other than what you see now. Beatrix's dainty mouth thinned. Not to worry, I will think of something. Will you go? Temperance's mind spun wildly as terror gripped her. Could she go? Venture out into the wilderness where she knew no one? Where Medlock could be at any turn and drag her home? But if she stayed here, then she knew what lay ahead of her. Her future had been mapped out for her from her husband's snarling mouth. She was there only to bear his children and keep home. He'd told her that if she couldn't do that, then he would find a woman who could, and she would be replaced, or worse. Though the thought of dying somehow seemed like an easier path for her to follow. She could no longer see her family. He had forbidden it, and was already seeking a new place for them to live, away from where they could find her. She was trapped, powerless. This was the sign she needed to try and fight back, to take back her life. What about Mama? She knows. I told her what you told me, but I think I only filled in a few gaps for her, as she had guessed most of it. Your father doesn't know. As Petra was concerned, your father might hurt Medlock and end up in front of a judge. At least now she'll know where you are. You can write to her unfettered. She has given me some money to give to you and get you started, so you do not need to fret about that. She's also paid for the travel tickets. I will find you a dress and you can have more made. Will you go? She repeated. Temperance, what do you say? Chapter 5. What's the matter with you tonight? Medlock ground out at her. Her hands were trembling as she dished out his meal, the spoon clattering against the serving bowl. Honestly, you're less than useless. He snatched the spoon from her and pushed her back. Temperance murmured her apology. Her mind was running at warp speed. It had been ever since Beatrix had left with her agreement that she would take the job. Long after her friend had left, she was racked with guilt over leaving her husband after she'd made her vows to him. She was racked with terror that he would guess her deception and what he would do to her if he found out. She'd missed most of her chores that afternoon and had barely slapped together their evening meal. He dumped a mound of potatoes on her plate, muttering about the humility of having to do things for himself. Eat, he pointed to her plate. Or do I have to do that for you too? She began to mechanically put the food into her mouth and had to close her eyes as her stomach protested violently at the thought of food. How was she going to pull this off? She couldn't even pretend to be a good wife. Surely he would know what she was planning. How could she run away halfway across the country and pretend to be someone else? What? What is it? She met his stare and swallowed her food, peeling back her lips in a facsimile of a smile. Nothing, husband. I just felt a bit lightheaded, but it's gone now. One more night, she told herself. Maybe you're with child. Should I make an appointment for the doctor to visit you? If you think that's best, Medlock. He eyed her for a moment, and she forked up more food. Then eat your food. My son will not be a weak and pitiful creature like his mother. She finished her meal and cleared the table, washing the dishes on autopilot. She just had to pretend for one more night. Of course. She could do this. She retired for the evening, made comments when he spoke, made apologies to his scathing remarks where she thought appropriate, and waited for him to fall asleep. Tomorrow, she was leaving. She could hear the clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds of the night, and she waited. Waited for the light fingers of dawn to reach around the edge of the bedroom drapes. She rose and dressed in her cleaning clothes, ragged and filthy. He believed that she was too stupid and weak to want to fight back. Maybe Temperance Forsythe was. Temperance Forsythe made him his usual breakfast, hovered about, and waited for him to finish his food as butterflies clamored about in her stomach, lifted her face for his peck on the cheek, bade him a good day, listened for the door latch to click into place. She rushed up to her bedchambers, intent on packing her items up to leave. She drew up short in their bedroom. Her gaze roved over the neat furniture, over his clothing cast aside and waiting for her to launder and hang back up. She realized that almost everything in this house was his. He'd eradicated everything that had been gifted generously by her parents to them upon their marriage. He'd either burned it or smashed it up in temper. He'd destroyed her clothes. There was nothing in this house that she wanted or needed, except for one thing, her one little act of rebellion. She quickly crossed to the dressing table and pulled out the narrow drawer, pulling it all the way out. At the back of the space, she'd secured her jewelry box, tucked away and wrapped in a cloth. She'd hidden it so that he couldn't destroy the gift from her grandmother. It was filled with gifts from her family across the years. Temperance Forsythe had taken the beatings, the cruel words, had been the obedient and compliant wife. She unwrapped the small silver box as she realized that maybe she did have the courage to be this daring, to run away and start again. The metal box winked at her in the morning sunlight that dappled the rich red carpet. But she was no longer Temperance Forsythe. She wouldn't be a downtrodden and submissive wife. She wouldn't listen to his cruel and terrible words that were like red-hot spikes into her heart. She heard the knock on the front door as a spurt of trepidation flooded her. It was time. A new life away from Medlock. Today and from now on, she was Tessa Nash. "Here you go, ma'am." Tessa emerged from the stagecoach and accepted the proffered hand of assistance from the guard. She gave him a small smile of thanks as she stepped down off the box and got the first glimpse of her new home. She'd left the train 3 days ago and changed to the stagecoach to finish the remainder of the journey overland, and the rocking motion of the coach was still very much in her mind. She waited for her small case to be handed down from the luggage rack. If she'd had to recall her journey of the past 6 days, even under duress, she didn't think that she could describe one element of the trip. Much of the time had been spent looking over her shoulder at the train station, and at every swing station they'd passed through since leaving Pittsburgh. Even with James and Beatrix's reassurances that Medlock wouldn't know where she was, and they certainly wouldn't tell him, she couldn't shrug off the sense of foreboding that dogged her for every mile she traveled further away. Now she waited as people swirled around her, where they collected luggage, and the hostler of the station unhooked the harness from the body of the coach to rest the team of horses for the night. Shady Plains wasn't how she'd imagined it. Modest, squat buildings that were simple in their design butted up against a sidewalk that traversed the dusty road. Some were part brick, part roughly hewn timber. The sun was settling down into a bed of evergreen trees where the town nestled into the foothills of craggy mountains that stretched up beyond the township. Each of the buildings was named for its purpose. Tessa could see a couple of saloons along the main route, each of which had horses outside that were dozing where they were tethered in the afternoon warmth. She could see the red and white striped pole outside of the barber shop. She accepted her case with a word of thanks and began to wander down the street. The town had a good feel to it. Several of the townsfolk ambled about their business, and Tessa was struck with how leisurely they seemed to move. No one was rushing or hurrying. A few locals stood chatting outside of the general store, and one even lifted a hand to greet her. She automatically dropped her gaze as she was supposed to do and avoided eye contact. Then, when she remembered that Medlock wasn't with her, she gave herself a mental shake. That was what Temperance would do, avoid anything to attract attention. She took in a steadying breath to soothe the anxiety that licked up inside and looked up again at the person who'd said hello, but they'd already moved on. She walked along the road only to realize that she'd actually passed by the hotel. She retraced her steps and was astonished by what she saw. She knew hotels to be magnificent edifices that roared luxury to all that passed by, so that the public would look on in envy of the guests who were seen to be staying at such a beautiful hotel. Instead, Drake Hotel and Rooms was a plain and unadorned building with a sign that was several colors and gripped the frontage crookedly. The door had been patched, and she could see that one of the curtain poles in the window drooped across the opening. A prosody rate plus 7%. The bench that had been placed on the porch outside was half finished. The building looked sad. As she stepped onto the porch, leaves and dried pins cushioned her footfall. She pushed open the door that creaked unpleasantly and stepped in. The silence rushed in on her, and so did the smell. Something had been burned recently. Tessa looked over the drab interior, the mismatched fabrics and the furniture that looked abandoned instead of being artfully placed. There wasn't a front desk, so she stood in the space, unsure of what to do or where to go. "Hello?" she called out after a few minutes. "Is there anyone here?" She knew that her employer was a man named Campbell Drake. She'd seen the replies that Beatrix had exchanged with him and had brought the letters with her to familiarize herself with the story that had been given. Tessa Nash was a young lady looking for work in a new place. She had good skills to apply to the role of housekeeper and was prepared to learn any skills to enhance her role here at the hotel. Bea had kept the backstory vague. Still, there was silence, so Tessa stepped forward, further into the building. Her anxiety stepped up a notch as she heard a crash, followed by a loud curse from deep within the belly of the house. What if he was another Medlock, or worse than him? She had made it to the front door when she heard the bootstep behind her. "Oh, sorry," the stranger pulled up short. "I wasn't expecting any guests today, but wait, it's Stagecoach Day, isn't it?" He dragged a hand down his flustered face. "Can I help you?" Tessa whirled, fear clawing her way up her throat that choked off her voice. Instead of seeing her husband bearing down on her, she met gentle green eyes, not blue, and she repeated that she wasn't in Pittsburgh. She was Tessa Nash. She could do this. She swallowed. "Mr. Drake, my name is Tessa." "Oh, Miss Nash." Can stepped into the room and looked about for a surface to set the linen in his arms down on. "Gosh, that's wonderful news. Welcome, welcome." Tessa watched as he shrugged and set the clean washing on the floor, stepped over them, and rushed towards her, his hand extended. She didn't want to even think about the clean linen on the floor, and took his hand. He had dark hair that curled over the soft gray shirt that he wore. He had on dark woolen slacks and boots. He was tall, taller than Medlock, and was handsome, with an aquiline nose and firmly cut lips that smiled warmly in a kind face. Her body rocked with the exertion of his handshake, and he let go, spreading his arms wide. "Welcome to the Drake Hotel." She glanced about once more and tried to look as pleased as he seemed to expect her to be. "It's a lovely property. Thank you. My wife and we wanted to do more." His letters hadn't mentioned a wife, but his next comment explained. "My Beth died a couple of years ago now. I've had a little help, as you can see. It's a big place, and it needs whipping into shape." "It's just you here?" Her brows climbed almost to her hairline as she looked about. Hawkins Hotels had a huge team of staff to ensure the smooth running, but that was a city hotel. Can nodded. "I had a housekeeper, of sorts. But, well, she left. And then Eddie Wilkes, he's over at the store, you'll meet him. He said to place an advert in the paper. You were the first to reply, and I need the help. Do you think you can help?" "Of course you can help. Your letters said you'd had some experience of hotels. Was that the truth? You've worked in a hotel before?" Tessa smiled as she pictured the sprawling buildings that shone under the Hawkins logo. Campbell's chatter was such a contrast to the cynical tone of her husband that it made for a pleasant change. "Yes, I know hotels." As she looked around her, she felt the familiar buzz of excitement, one that she'd had when she'd stood next to Garland Hawkins in his second hotel, the one she'd helped with the design and development. That long-felt burn of thrill at a challenge, one that had been extinguished through suffocation and spite. She could do something with this place. She could drag it from mediocrity and drab to one of fame but she didn't want that. She couldn't bring the Hawkins pizzazz here. She reminded herself that she needed to stay under the radar. She was in hiding. "Good," Cam replied as he scooped up the laundry once more. "Let me show you around the place. Show you how everything works." Chapter 6, July 1888. 3 months later. That sign finally looks finished, Eddie remarked as he began to ring up Campbell's purchases. Cam made a non-committal sound as his eyes were drawn through the window and across the road to the hotel. It did look better, even distorted through the glass at this angle. I take it your new maid is working out then? Yeah, she's been good. Too good, Cam added silently. She'd made suggestions that even he'd not considered to improve the business, and, not for the first time, he wondered about her past. I have Larry building me a front desk that she insists will help. I've now got a book that I write everything in so I can get organized ready for bookings. She's very knowledgeable. Eddie cocked a hip against the counter as he pursed his lips. Still no word on where she's come from? Cam shook his head. Nope. Sticks to the same story. A hotel in New York, and she's a quick study. On the occasions that he'd pushed for an answer, she'd clammed up faster than an oyster and practically sprinted from him. If he didn't know better, he'd guess she was scared. But of what or whom? He shrugged to himself. It's nothing to do with me. She's an employee, nothing more. I don't want to scare her off, as she's helping the business no end, and that's what I paid her for. Bessie, you know from over at the Mercantile? Well, she tells me she's ordered a couple of outfits, paid in cash. He folded his arms as he leaned on the counter and settled in to divulge information. Nothing fancy, but Bessie says that your girl knew what to order and was precise in the outfits she wanted. So she thinks that she's used to buying fancy clothing. She's not my girl. Eddie waved a dismissive hand. You know what I mean. Plus, when Bessie called her name, she didn't react right away, had to repeat it a time or two. Do you think she's being entirely honest? Campbell was uncomfortable talking about Tessa like this. She was clearly a private person. What business of his was it what her past was? He'd thought once or twice he'd heard her shouting out in the dead of the night, but then he wondered if maybe it had been a coyote or a wolf. She'd never said a word, but then she didn't seem to sleep much. He kept telling himself that she was just his employee, even if she sometimes drifted through his mind just before sleep claimed him. I told you, it's not my business. Cam picked up his shopping items, stacking them huffily. Ain't yours either, Eddie. She's a good worker. That's all that matters to me. A smirk danced over Eddie's lips as Campbell flounced from the store. A man that defensive over a woman surely had a secret or two of his own. Campbell strode across the street, trying not to let Eddie's words bug him. Along the street, he could hear a ruckus kicking up. A gaggle of people gathered around an argument. He kept his eyes averted, knowing that by now Eddie would be at the window and watching the show avidly. Not for the first time, Cam noted how clean and pristine the front of the hotel was. He'd not known a woman work as tirelessly as Tessa did. She was up when it was still dark, ensuring that the hotel was immaculate and organized. Even the front of the hotel now gleamed in the bright sunshine. She'd had him repair the bench out the front and placed cushions on the seat so that his guests could sit comfortably in the shade. He pushed open the door and stepped into the cool interior. She must have recently washed the floor, as he could still see the water streaks. He knew that they had guests booked in off the stage later that day. Fresh flowers sat in vases on the windowsills, the cut glass refracting the light into a pretty mosaic on the floor. Not for the first time, he noted how pleasant the place smelled. She'd told him that ambiance was important for letting the guests know that they could relax and enjoy their stay. Before then, he didn't recall that word ever entering a conversation he'd had. "Tess!" he called out, kicking the door shut behind him and skirting round the edge of the damp floor. "Where are you?" He heard her steps coming from the kitchen and walked to meet her. "Here," he handed her the items: soap, matches, coffee, scouring powder. She opened her hands and accepted the items, then set them on a side table. "Thank you, Mr. Drake." He'd given up asking her to call him Campbell in the 3 months that she'd been living here. She seemed to prefer a more formal tone. "I shall go and take a look at that sink out the back." "Okay, did you have any preferences for lunch?" They both turned as the bell above the door tinkled and a young lady stepped through the door. She was young, pretty, and was visibly upset. Campbell recognized her from being in the group that had been arguing in the street when he'd left Eddie's not 10 minutes earlier. "Morning, miss." He stepped forward. "Welcome to the Drake Hotel. Can I help?" She let the door close behind her and her eyes fixed on Tessa. I was told that you may have a room. I was supposed to meet my future husband, but her voice trailed off as her emotions got the better of her. She took a breath. The other hotel, he wouldn't accept a single female guest. Oh, Cam cleared his throat. Yes, that's the same policy that I have here, I'm afraid. Her gaze flicked briefly to him and fresh tears filled her eyes once more. Was there anywhere else to go that will take a lone female, do you know? I have money, I can pay. Cam sighed. Although he felt sorry for her, he knew that some of the local townsfolk held firm on their belief. Beth had been strict on this too. He shook his head. All right, the girl nodded and thanked him. As the door closed behind her, Campbell turned, trying to recall the conversation that had been interrupted, but pulled up short when he caught the look of utter disbelief on Tessa's face. She folded her arms and cocked a brow. What? He asked. Are you quite mad? Chapter 7. Tessa had been in Shady Plains for 3 months now. In that time, her body had begun to heal. She'd gained a little weight and had had to have some clothing made, and her dress that she'd worn to travel in had to be let out. Her room in the hotel was at the back, and she woke every morning to a view of the backyard where Cam kept the horse and wagon. Very often, there would be a stray hog or chicken pecking at the ground when she went out to bring water in from the pump. The town had a pleasant and easy rhythm to it. All of the horror stories she'd heard about how wild the frontier towns could be didn't seem to be the case here. The sheriff was a decent man and seemed to have any rowdy behavior under control. The townsfolk were good people, and she had politely sidestepped their curiosity of her history prior to arriving in town, keeping the backstory simple and deliberately vague. At first, with every stagecoach that had arrived in town, she'd been petrified that Medlock would be on it. For the first month, every time the doorbell had tinkled, she was terrified that she would see his tall frame filling the door. She had woken from several nightmares with a scream trapped in her throat. She knew he'd been to her parents' and to Beatrix's house looking for her. Their letters had said as much to reassure her that he didn't know where she was. She was starting to let down her guard a little, and as she was doing so, the old Temperance was starting to come back out. She'd forget that she was just a housekeeper at Drake Hotel and give Campbell some business advice. Then, when he would give her a strange look, and she would remember that she was Tessa Nash, not Temperance Hawkins of Hawkins Hotels. Campbell was a good man. He'd not once raised his voice or his hands to her. He simply asked her for an explanation as to why she'd made the suggestion and listened to her reasoning. She liked him, liked the hotel, but was regularly frustrated that he couldn't see the potential that his hotel had. Like now, for instance, his brows climbed his forehead at her tone. Begging your pardon? Her inner voice was urging her to watch her tone, but annoyance flickered through the sound. You're turning away trade. We have the space, rooms to let. Why on earth would you do that? It's not like you're fully booked now, is it? Cam blinked at her. She's a lone female. What would the locals think? Do the locals pay your bills and spend their money here? She scoffed and threw her arms wide. Are they bashing down the doors to stay here? No, they are not, Mr. Drake. The other hotel won't take them, which means you could have an edge on the competition, she told him. Her money is the same color as any man wanting to stay here. His lips rolled inwards as her reasoning was sensible, even if her tone was stinging his ego. Tessa, I think you're forgetting your place. This is my hotel. She nodded and felt the fight go out of her. This wasn't her hotel. It was his. Very well, Mr. Drake. I just don't like to see a woman who's been beaten cast out on the streets. His gaze sharpened on her and then swung back to the door. He tried to recall the young woman, the tear-stained face, the red marks on her cheek that was hand-shaped, the dirt on her skirts. She was probably a mail-order bride, alone, and she had nowhere to go. Campbell growled in exasperation, and he strode towards the door, pulling it open. Tessa stared at the door, a hand on her mouth as she listened to his retreating boots. She still hadn't moved when she heard him coming back and could make out his easy tone as he conversed with the young girl. It's just until I can get a ticket on the stagecoach, she told him. I cannot thank you enough. May God bless you. Tessa saw how uncomfortable Cam looked under the praise of the young lady as he walked into the foyer. She bit back her smile. "That's quite all right," he muttered. "Miss Nash, this is Nora Barton. She will need a single room for the night, possibly two. I shall leave you in the capable hands of my manager, Nora." Tessa lifted a brow at the job title of manager, but wisely kept her mouth shut. "Call me Tessa." She stepped forward and took the young girl's carpet bag. Her eyes glanced over the welt that spanned her face. "Here, come and sit down. I'll fetch you a cold compress, too. You must be exhausted." "I'm quite hungry," she replied. "Do you offer food here?" Tessa shot a pointed look at Cam. She'd told him on many occasions that offering food and refreshments here instead of sending his guests along to the restaurant in town would be another strand of income for the hotel. "I am sure I can rustle you something up." Cam stalked from the room, muttering under his breath, and left Tessa to settle their guest. Campbell found Tessa sat in the backyard. She didn't move as he stepped out of the door. Instead, her faraway stare seemed to be gazing at nothing in particular. The heat had seeped from the day, and twilight brought cooler mountain air. On more than one occasion, he'd caught her by surprise when approaching her, and the fear that he'd seen cross her features had been real and uncontrolled. So he made sure his boots scraped the wooden decking under his feet. She gave a startled gasp and shot halfway out of the chair before she stopped. She put a hand to her chest and exhaled as she resumed her seat. He chuckled to cover his discomfort. "I always seem to manage to sneak up on you." He set the lamp he'd brought out on the rail that spanned the porch. "Mind if I sit?" "Sure." She waved a hand and he lowered himself down before he sat back and stretched out his long legs, stacking one foot atop the other. "Long day," he murmured as he felt lethargy steal over him. "I thought you'd be in bed by now. I like this time of the day. It's peaceful and my mind can just mull over things." He slid his eyes to hers, tracing her profile in the glow of the lamp. She was looking at the stars that were beginning to wink through the velvety night sky. "I wanted to apologize." Chapter 8. She looked at him in shock, her mouth rounded. "For what?" "I was a bit short with you earlier when Nora arrived. It's just the way I've always done things here." He watched her mind process the apology and she blinked rapidly. "I understand," she began but stopped when he held up a hand. "I think I've been bogged down with the process that I forgot I had a business to build. I've even allowed the desk bell, granted. It still makes me want to throw it through the window when people summon me like I'm some sort of skivvy." Tessa smirked at him. "You're a hotelier, Mr. Drake, hardly a skivvy. That's what I'm here for." Beth was a stickler for the rules. "I needed reminding that things change. I'm sorry if my tone is sharp with you. I hadn't noticed the tone. I think I maybe overstepped my place. This is your hotel, but I saw the marks on her face." He sighed as she broke the contact to look down at her hands. "Tessa, I know that there's more to your story than you're letting on. You have your reasons for being here." He watched as her lower lip disappeared between her teeth, and she began to worry it. She didn't reply, but simply nodded at him, confirming his suspicions. He wanted to say more but didn't feel it was his place to pry. He already had this overpowering urge to protect her, though, when he thought of the sparks that seemed to fly from her earlier when she challenged him. He wondered if maybe she could quite easily hold her own. "You've done a great deal for the hotel, already. Bookings are increasing, and I'm going to place an advert tomorrow for a cook. We'll start to offer breakfast and an evening meal. I'm thinking that maybe we could do with another chambermaid to help you too. What do you think?" He held the steady stare that she gave him and felt the smile that wobbled across her mouth down to his core. "I think that would be a grand idea," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat, pushing away the odd sensation that suddenly filled him. He slid his feet under him and pushed to his feet. "I'll get on that first thing." He walked in through the back door and leaned against the frame. What was wrong with him? He hadn't had his mind cloud like that since Beth. He must be tired, he told himself, and elbowed away from the frame. He just needed an early night. Outside, Tessa let the tears fall unchecked from her eyes. It felt good to have someone seeking her opinions again, asking her permission on things, because her decisions mattered. She smiled as she leaned back and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt like herself again. The clock ticked loudly in the hallway. The fire had long since been extinguished, and the room held a chill that Medlock didn't notice. His whiskey tumbler was marked with fingerprints as he'd simply filled it over and over. It wasn't his place to wash a glass. It was another reminder that Temperance had gone. He brooded into the darkness. His anger shrouded him like a blanket to comfort him in the dark. He'd had time to bank his fury. He'd ripped the house apart looking for clues as to where that soiled dove had gone. He'd battered down the household doors of both Hawkins and Nash, demanding that they hand over his property. That idiot Garland had called the police on him, and Medlock had had to suffer the imposition of being manhandled from the property. He'd not set foot in his office in over a month as his colleagues had caught wind that his wife simply vanished. They'd asked him about it, speculated where she was, why she'd left, so he'd just stopped going. It was embarrassing and reprehensible. This was all her fault. If he lost his house, it would be her fault. It was her fault that he'd not had a home-cooked meal in months. It was her fault. Her fault. Tomorrow he would go back to the office. He couldn't lose himself like this. He was better than this. He would pretend like everything was fine. He would answer the questions. He would say she had clearly gone mad and ran off. After all, why would she leave a man who provided a home and a hearth for her? He could explain away his odd behavior of late by way of a broken heart. Isn't this how those sycophants acted? In the meantime, he would continue his lines of inquiry to find her. No one just disappeared into thin air. He knew the first time that he'd seen her from across the room that he would marry her. Her beauty was like nothing he'd ever encountered before. She'd worked the room, engaging and delightful, parading like a peacock for everyone to notice her. And he'd watched those men follow her, tripping over themselves to gain her attention. Even now, he knew that wherever she was, she would have a man enraptured in her snare. His glass exploded against the wall, and he watched the liquid roll down to puddle on the wooden floor. His hands balled into fists. He knew he needed to get a hold of himself. Impotent rage bubbled inside him. He got up to clear away the mess. The good news was that whilst no one knew where she was, it meant that no one would miss her when he did find her, and pictured his hands around that white, delicate neck as he swept up the shards. He would find her if it was the last thing he did. Chapter 9. Don't you ever stop? Tessa straightened and turned to the voice. Her hand resting on the broom, a smile tugged at her lips. Afternoon, Charlie. How are you? Charlie rested his forearms on the rail and pushed back his hat with a thumb as he grinned. All the better for seeing you, Miss Nash. She laughed, as she knew she was meant to do, but the harmless flirting made her uncomfortable. Now, Charlie, I told you to save those lines for the ladies. You're wasting your time with me, she resumed, sweeping the front of the hotel. Now, Miss Nash, he mimicked her tone playfully, I can't help myself. I see a pretty lady, and I just want to make her smile. Go on, Charlie. She didn't look back. I don't have time for shenanigans. He chuckled. When is your day off? Will you let me call on you? I don't have a day off. Well, I shall have to speak to your boss, won't I? I heard he was hiring you some help on account of the hotel getting busier. Tessa set the broom to one side and fetched a pan to pick up the debris. He has hired a lovely young maid named Alice. She's new to the area, and I'm sure she'd love for someone to show her around the local places. Charlie chuckled and dropped his arms by his sides as he stepped back. Come on, Miss Nash. Maybe I won't like this, Alice. Tessa walked over to the railings and schooled her face. She knew that the ranch hand meant no harm to her, but she needed to cut this off before it got any more serious. Charlie, I'm flattered. I really am. Any girl would be lucky to have such a friendly man to escort her out. Just not this girl. He spread his hands out. Can't blame a guy for trying. Is it true what folks are saying? She folded her arms. What are they saying about me now? That you're on the run from the law. Amusement twinkled in her eyes. In the 5 months that she'd been in Shady Plains, she'd heard some of the rumors circulating about her past. She thought she'd done well with making up a solid backstory. Yet people seemed to be naturally curious about her. A criminal on the lam was a new one. What do you think, Charlie? He shot her a wink. I think I'll be by tomorrow to ask to call on you again. Tessa watched him whistle as he strolled off, hands tucked into his pockets. Tessa pursed her lips as she watched him go. What was he sniffing about here for? Tessa waited for Bessie to reach her before she answered. Since their initial meeting at her textile shop, whereby Bessie had been aloof and suspicious at Tessa ordering her new outfits, she had since warmed up considerably to her. Oh, you know Charlie. Harmless enough but won't take no for an answer. Tessa shrugged. I can have a word with Mary McKinley if you like. Charlie works on their place. She'll have Mac talk to him. Tessa shook her head. I can handle him. Oh, and thank you for the recommendation of the butcher. The cutlets are delicious. I'm glad. I think it's a good idea to serve breakfast and to use local produce. Makes it a better situation for all involved. Bessie's eyes ran over the exterior of the hotel. Sure does look different since you got here, Tessa. You're doing a magnificent job. Thank you. Even though it wasn't her property, she did take pride in it. The fact that there were more and more bookings coming through was great news too. But Bessie's next comment made her stomach drop like a stone. It'll be the talk of the state before you're finished here. Campbell watched the exchange between Charlie and Tessa through Eddie's shop window. He could see the jovial stance of Eddie and knew that the ranch hand would be laying down the charm to woo her. Prosody. Even his swagger as he walked away was like salt in a wound to Cam. He sighed as he turned and came nose to nose with Eddie. How long have you been stood there? Long enough to hear that sigh of unrequited love. Eddie teased him with a nudge that eased to laughter at Cam's scowl. Oh, Campbell, you can't deny she's a delight. Look at what she's done to your place. And now she's put on a little weight. Even you have to admit that she's a real looker. The comments irritated him more than he would dare to admit, especially to Eddie the town gossip. She's an employee, a good one, I'll grant you. So get your mind out of the saloon gutter. Are you going to ask her to the dance next week? Nope. Someone will swoop in and beat you to the post. You said yourself, she's a good homemaker. She can cook, she's pretty, so she'll look good on your arm. Cam's eyes drifted back through the window to where she stood chatting to Bessie. She definitely made an impression on the townsfolk. She was an active member in the church group, and her sharp mind had turned his business around. He wondered again about her backstory. Which hotel in New York had been daft enough to let her go? He'd seen a few of the local young men sniff around her, every single one rebuffed. He liked that she only seemed interested in the business. Wasn't that why he'd hired her? But not for the first time. He wanted to know what made her tick. Why even all these months later she would still startle so easily? There was more to this mysterious woman. Beth wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your time on Earth all alone, Cam. Cam's eyes sharpened on Eddie. He swallowed. Beth had been gone a while now. She'd been a good woman, decent and wholesome. What would she have made of Tessa Nash? Eddie, balance your account books and mind your business. Did my order come in? Chapter 10. I was thinking about your position here at the hotel, Campbell declared. They were in the small office that he'd installed to the side of the small foyer. Campbell had a table and chair in the tiny room that doubled as a desk, and he could still see the front of house in case they had guests. She was returning a file to the shelf as she turned her head to look at him. From this close, she could see the hazel flecks in the green of his eyes. What about it? I want to make your position a bit more prominent. She was shaking her head even before she'd made a sound, as Bessie's words from the other day came back to haunt her. No. Wait, you haven't even asked for terms. She stepped back. Why had she been so driven in the role? All she had to do was make some beds and sweep the floors. Instead, she had forgotten the reason that she was here. I'm perfectly happy with our arrangement. I already told you I didn't like the position of manager. You're the hotelier, Mr. Drake. I'm very happy with the present arrangement we have. Okay. He steepled his fingers as he rested his elbows on the desk. Your point about some people not liking a female manager made good business sense, but the hotel is getting a good reputation. Word is getting out, Tessa. Why would you not want to take credit for your hard work? She blinked rapidly as anxiety began to build. Notoriety meant that her picture might be in the papers. Would those papers go as far as Pittsburgh? I read somewhere that those fancy hotels in Europe have something called a hotel portier. He wiggled his fingers as he stumbled over the word, and she felt a smile tug at her mouth. "This is hardly Fifth Avenue," she murmured. "Campbell, please." He stilled at her use of his first name. "Please, let me stay in the back of house. And don't push the issue." She blinked to stem the tears. He sat up as he saw her struggle and began to shuffle papers unnecessarily. "Sure thing, Tessa. It was only an idea." Guilt swamped her as she realized that she was duping him more than anyone else in this town. He'd been nothing but courteous to her. All the townsfolk had been nice, and she was lying to them all. Her deception had just seemed to reach a whole new level. For a moment she wanted to explain to him why, to unburden herself of the lies she'd weaved since arriving, having to constantly remember what she'd said to whom in case a little white lie tripped her up. The letters from home tried to absolve her of the guilt that she'd confessed to feeling. She'd settled in the town. There was decent folk here who didn't deserve to be misled so. Yet what choice did she really have? She was still married. Medlock could still drag her home if he found out. And now, after she'd tasted freedom and seen how good her life could be, she selfishly didn't want to give that up. She realized that he was now staring at her, as she was dithering about in the corner, having not said a word. Alice. I took the liberty of ordering her a simple dress and a white apron. It's what I've seen the staff wearing in." His face hardened as she made the hasty subject change. "Yes," he snapped. "Fine." His movements were jerky, and that grated over her jagged nerves. She suppressed a sigh and left the room. Better that he be annoyed with her than Medlock discover where she was. Cam dropped the papers with a sigh and watched her retreating back as she headed towards the kitchen. For just a moment, he'd wanted to shout at her, to demand that she tell him what it was that had her hiding out in their town. She'd not exhibited any criminal behavior. In fact, his takings were better than they ever were, and he was considering how to expand to make more rooms. He now had the financial freedom to be able to hire people. He could afford to sleep easy at night. It was all down to her innovation. Yet, Tessa haunted his dreams, and it was beginning to affect his judgment. He'd wanted to show her his gratitude, to reward her by shouting from the rooftops that a woman had helped build this business. He'd felt the effects of her saying his name like a sucker punch to his gut. He dragged a hand down his face as he sat back. He didn't think he would have been this affected had she raged at him, but hearing a whispered plea had undone him more than anything else would. He didn't like that she was affecting him like this, clouding in on his mind when he should be focusing on the job in hand. He knew it was nothing she was doing. He really did want to keep their relationship on the professional level that she insisted on. Watching Charlie chat away to her the other day had irked him. Maybe it was time to acknowledge that his housekeeper, as she wanted to be known, had worked her way behind the wall around his heart, and he didn't like that one bit. It was the sunlight slanting through the part-drawn drapes that woke Medlock Forsythe from his slumber. He lifted his head off the floor and blinked blearily into the room. A dull throb pulsed to his heart rate around his skull, and he ran a tongue around his dry mouth, smacking his lips together as he peeled himself up and into a sitting position. He'd passed out in the drawing room. He dragged a hand down his face and then smoothed his hair down as he looked at his attire. He remembered being in the public house until quite late on yesterday. Slowly, fragments of the night came back to him. He pushed to his feet and surveyed the room. All around him was chaos. There wasn't one ornament in the room unbroken. Glass crunched under his feet as he stumbled, the world tilting precariously as he glanced about. He remembered having some bar wench draped over him. He remembered the cab ride back. He remembered dropping from the box and the driver laughing at him. He remembered the comment about his wife not being happy if he couldn't perform. Humiliation had burned deep inside, and he remembered the front door splintering. He looked at the dried blood on his knuckles as he remembered his temper fraying. He remembered thinking that he shouldn't have been in the barroom at all. He should have been at home with his wife. He'd ripped the room apart, breaking wedding gifts, picture frames, upending furniture. All he'd wanted to do was punish Temperance. He belched loudly, and his stomach protested, burning fire in his gullet. He rubbed a hand over his belly, then scratched his stomach through his shirt. He walked to the chair and slumped into it, his head in his hands. He was losing control. He knew it. He knew that he was the laughingstock of the town, the man who couldn't hold on to his wife. But she'd absconded, walked away from him. Him! He should burn everything. She'd left everything behind. She clearly didn't appreciate all that he'd provided for her. He spied her wretched books that had spilled from the bookcase where he'd pulled it over. Lips firmed, he stooped, collected up a few of them, and dropped them into the hearth before he lit a taper and held it to one. Watching the flames lick over the paper of one of her precious books gave him a kick of pleasure. He should have made her watch him burn them years ago, but it gave a better impression if people thought that they were avid readers. The scent of the smoke filled the room, and he bent for more books, adding them to the fire. In his mind, he pictured her tears, her pleas begging him to stop burning them. Blindly, he reached out for another and stopped as he saw something flutter from one of the pages. He tilted his head as he stepped back to see what had landed at his feet. He dropped to his haunches, tilting the paper towards the flames for a better look. His heart gave a little skip of recognition as he read the advert. An advert for jobs listed on the frontier. He stood, dropped the book as he moved to the window, and ripped back the drapes. An address for an office here in Pittsburgh. His lips peeled back to a grin. He finally had a lead on where his little rat of a wife might be hiding. Chapter 11. There was a chill in the air as Tessa stepped out of the hotel, and she pulled the collar of her jacket closer up round her neck. The sky was a clear blue, and she could smell the pleasant scent of pine on the air that wafted over the little town. She mused, not for the first time, how at ease she felt here. She was still becoming used to be able to move about freely, without fear of speaking to someone she wasn't allowed to, without worrying. The sense of freedom was incredible, and she didn't think that she would ever take it for granted. She lifted a hand to wave as greetings were called to her. It was nice to feel the air buff her cheeks, to be able to inhale the crisp mountain air, to see the sun peep out of the clouds. She waited on the boardwalk for a wagon to roll past that was being trailed by 3 riders. At first, she thought that maybe they were together, but then she noticed how still the street had become. Her eyes swiveled, and she noticed that the trio was being stared at, and her eyes were drawn to them for a closer look. The men all had similar features. Their hats were pulled down low on their faces, so their eyes were in shadow. All 3 of them needed a shave. Their clothes were dirty. The one at the rear slid his eyes to her, and she felt her body naturally shudder from the look. His eyes meandered slowly over her, and he lifted his hat and gave her a nod as he rode past her. They reined in and dismounted outside the saloon, securing their mounts to the post outside the bar before they headed inside. Tessa hurried across the street to where Eddie was stood on his stoop, leaning against the corner post. "Morning, Mr. Wilkes." "Hey, Miss Tessa," he murmured to her, eyes still on the saloon. Slowly, the town began to move again. "What's going on? Who were those men?" "That there were the Anders brothers," he replied as he pushed away from the post. "Nothing but trouble, the 3 of 'em. Oh, well, they certainly got everyone's attention. That's 'cause folks round here know what to expect when they roll into town. Don't see them all that often." "What do they want?" He shrugged as he held the door open for her and followed her inside. "Not much. Normally, just a beer and some supplies. The sheriff is on it now. Look." He nodded as she saw the lawman stroll across the street, his hand on his gun belt. "As I said, it's usually nothing, but everyone will be on alert till they take their leave." The bell tinkled as he shut the door behind them. "How are you? You seemed to be smiling into thin air as you were wandering down the street." "Just a happy day for me, Mr. Wilkes," she replied as she followed him to the counter. "How are you?" "Oh, you know, can't complain. Even if I did, no one would listen. Mr. Wilkes, I'm sure you put on this effect just for me. You always have a ready smile for people." "Only a smile for the pretty ones," he winked. "What do you need?" "I was hoping the post had been. You expecting some news from Pittsburgh?" His assumption put a shadow in her eyes before she remembered that he was probably just checking the postmarks on the envelopes. "Not news, just a word from my friend. I've not had a letter from her in a few weeks." He frowned as her gaze dropped to the floor, and he felt guilt over mentioning it. "Nothing yet, but there is something for Cam. You'd be helping me out by running it over for him." "Sure, I can do that." Eddie slid over the small box and began to fidget. folded his arms, unfolded them, coughed to clear his throat. Miss Tessa, he began, fidgeted some more as he strove for a casual tone. Say, how's Miss Alice settling in? It was Tessa's turn to fold her arms, and laughter danced in her expression as she considered him. Just fine, Eddie. Good worker, studious and clean. Why do you ask? He fiddled with the items on the countertop, straightening them as he avoided her scrutiny. Just, the natural curiosity of a newcomer. He pursed his lips, then asked, So, she's good? Eddie Wilkes, are you maybe sweet on someone? The crimson blush crawled up his neck. Oh, no? Ma'am, he shook his head vigorously. No, no. She collected up the box and this time gave him the wink. Your secret is safe with me. Wait. Eddie chased her around the counter and followed her out of the door. Wait just a moment. Don't you go saying anything to anyone now. Tessa paused by the doorway. His obvious mortification made her take pity on him. I know that she's looking forward to the harvest dance. And I happen to know that no one has asked her to accompany them yet. Maybe you should ask her to save a dance for you, Mr. Wilkes. Eddie scowled at her apparent glee. Maybe I will, he muttered, but don't go saying nothing on my behalf, especially not to Campbell. You hear me? She held her laughter at his gruff tone until she reached the hotel. Seeing his obvious discomfiture was sweet. It had been a long time since she'd seen the innocence of that first glimpse of a relationship or a budding romance. She knew that she would never experience that for herself again. How could she when she was still legally married? Even if she were ever to become interested in a man, how could she trust her heart? Medlock had completely bluffed his way into her life. He was not the man he'd portrayed himself to be, and by the time she realized it, it was too late to back out. But that didn't mean that she couldn't see her new friends be happy and enjoy a romance vicariously. Campbell leaned against the rough-hewn wooden walls of the dance hall, a smile playing over his mouth. This was the first time he'd been to one of the dances in years, as he'd always been too busy or too mired in his grief to care. It may have been down to Tessa's involvement in the planning of the dance or hearing all the talk of it from the locals, but he'd found himself running his fingers through his hair and putting on a tie without really much conscious thought on the issue. The dance hall was packed, that was for certain. There was a small band plucking out a tune of the piano and the banjo that had been rescued from somewhere twanged along. The floor vibrated with the staccato thump of boots stamping into the flooring along with the beat. The room had been decorated with red and white materials, with leaves and twigs fetched in from the forest to celebrate the harvest. All around him, folks were having a good time, and it buoyed his mood along. Not for the first time this evening, his eyes were drawn to the beauty who watched the crowd from a seat in the corner. She was wearing a blue dress that had a lace collar, with tiny buttons down the front of it. He knew via Eddie that she'd requested the dress especially as Bessie had made her attend the dance, more so because she'd been instrumental in bringing the event together. Even though she was in shadow, he could easily make out her profile and the peaceful smile that was on her face. He liked that she looked happy. It was the hand curling around his bicep that brought him out of his reverie, and he looked down into the face of young Patty Tipton. Her eyes gleamed in a predatory fashion as she pulled on his arm. Campbell Drake, I do believe that this is the first time I've seen you at one of these dances. He resisted her action as he tried to extricate his arm. That's because it's the first time I've been to one in years, Patty. Then you must owe me at least one dance. Campbell swallowed, uncomfortable at her boldness. He knew that women in the West were not constrained by the custom of waiting for a man, but he also knew that Patty was old enough to be his daughter. Easy, Patty. There are lots of ranch hands here tonight who would be only too happy to take a step or two with you. She shook her head and her grip increased. Campbell Drake, I simply won't take no for an answer. He peeled her fingers from his arm and pushed her hands back towards her. No thank you, Patty. She pouted and folded her arms before she flounced away, blonde curls bouncing. He exhaled and resumed his position against the wall. When his eyes tracked back across the room, Tessa's seat was empty. Cam sighed. Suddenly, the dance didn't seem to be as enjoyable anymore. Tessa crossed the street, the din from the hall receding the cool evening air. She'd made suggestions during one of the church meetings on how to organize the harvest event, and before she knew it, she was in charge of the committee. She'd had to go. She'd reluctantly put on a pretty dress and had shown her face tonight, staying only long enough to be considered polite before the noise and the stuffy atmosphere had almost choked her. Being surrounded by that many people had been claustrophobic. It bothered her that she could still be perturbed by such issues. She wasn't in any danger anymore, yet the qualms of her old self lived on. The road was deserted as most of the townsfolk were either dancing the night away or at home. She could just about make out the shapes of the buildings in the pale moonlight as she hurried along. She reasoned that she needed to check on the guests and help Della, their new cook, who'd agreed to manage the desk for the evening. She cut down the narrow walkway that bisected Main Street onto Front Street, as it was the fastest way back to the hotel. The muffled sound of a footfall behind her had her whirling in fright. Her hands raised up in defense. "Who's there?" she called out to the dark shadow she could see stumbling towards her. "Smee," the reply was slurred. Tessa squinted through the darkness. "Charlie?" He ricocheted off the wall and spread his hands to pause for balance. "Yes, ma'am. What are you doing out here? I saw you dancing." He wobbled as he pulled up in front of her. "But you turned me down. You're the prettiest girl in town, Tessa." He exhaled noisily, and she was assaulted with the stench of whiskey. "Go home, Charlie." She waved a hand in front of her face as she grimaced. "You're drunk. If the sheriff sees you out here like this, you'll be cooling your heels in the jail." Too late, she missed the movement as he lunged for her. He pinned her against the wall as his hands roamed freely, roughly, and he made guttural sounds and exclamations of what he wanted to do to her. Panic seized her, clouded her mind as her breath stalled in her chest. Tessa turned her face, eyes shut tight as she felt the hot, putrid stench of warm breath. She was frozen to the spot, her hands coming up to protect her face. If she was still, it would be over sooner. If she tried to fight back, the pain would be worse. She was back in Pittsburgh, trapped, helpless, powerless. She held her breath as she waited for the blows, as she begged and pleaded for him to stop. Pitiful mewling as she slid unassisted to the ground, sobbing. She was unaware of the weight suddenly being yanked off her, of the sound of flesh striking flesh. She just waited for the pain. There was always pain. Chapter 12. Campbell's long legs ate up the distance as he headed back to the hotel. He ignored the small voice inside that mocked him. He'd told himself he needed to check on his guests when he just wanted to check on Tessa. He would maybe get a glimpse of her through the hotel windows to reassure himself, then go back to the dance. He didn't need to add fuel to Eddie's fire of teasing him about hankering after his housekeeper. As he turned into the alleyway, he heard a sound that stopped his heart, Tessa begging, pleading as dark shadows wrestled up against the wall. In the murky passageway, he could see that she had her head turned, her hands covered her face. Without thinking, Campbell ran towards them, grabbing the assailant and pulled him off her before he drove a fist into his face. The velocity of the action sent the attacker backward, and Cam stood over his prone form as he howled on the ground. "Charlie? What the heck, man?" Cam said as he recognized him. "What are you doing?" Cam spun back. Tessa was laid down, curled into a ball as she cried softly. His gut twisted as he dropped to the floor beside her. Charlie scrambled to his feet and fled back out onto Main Street, one hand over his face as he hobbled away. "Tessa?" Cam murmured. "Hey, it's okay. He's gone. You're okay now." He reached out a tentative hand and she flinched. "Shh, I won't hurt you. You're safe now," he tried again. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" He rested a hand on her shoulder and gave her a shake. "Tessa, it's Campbell. You're okay. I'm here now." He knew the instant she started to come back to him, back from whatever hell her mind had her trapped in. She dropped her hands and she looked at him. One side of her face was covered in the dirt she'd lain in. "Campbell?" "Yes, Tessa, you're okay. He's gone," he added as her eyes shot to the mouth of the alley. "Can you stand up for me?" She nodded and accepted the hand that he held out. "I saw him coming. I can't believe he—" "I'll have the sheriff deal with him, mark my words," he muttered darkly, having to catch her as she wobbled. "Did he hurt you?" Anger rippled through him at the thought of that hooligan touching her. "No, She answered on an exhale. "I'm just so thankful you were here. I was just coming to check on you, the hotel, and Della." Tessa turned towards him as she ran her hands down the front of her dress. He saw that she was missing a few of the tiny buttons from the bodice, and his temper notched up a level. He should have hit him a few more times. "Can you walk?" "Mm-hmm." The wibbly smile she gave him did nothing to soothe his nerves as they stepped out into the moonlight. He paused, a hand on her shoulder, as she stopped, watched as her breath hiccuped and her body began to shake violently. He watched helplessly as her face crumpled as she gave into the tears that she'd clearly been fighting. With a growl, he caught her up in his arms and held her against his chest as he marched towards his hotel, an impotent rage boiling within him. He didn't know what her past was, but he knew that she was used to being hurt, to being mauled, to being treated badly. He resolved there and then to protect her. Tessa gave in to the support that Campbell offered and allowed herself to be cradled as he carried her. She turned her face into his shirt and couldn't stop the tears that fell. Disappointment flooded her. She'd believed that she was over the trauma of being married to Medlock, of the beatings. She believed that she'd left Temperance Forsythe behind, that she was no longer that helpless, trapped female. Yet, the first instance where she needed to fight back, she'd resorted back to type and had been prepared to allow Charlie to take from her. She'd been trained to accept the beating when she told herself that she would now be stronger to fight back, that Tessa Nash wouldn't allow a man to hurt her as Temperance had done. She felt Cam's boots strike the wood of the back porch and lifted her head to see that he'd chosen the back entrance of the hotel. She gave a sigh of relief that at least she wouldn't see any of the guests. He kicked open the back door and set her down in the chair at the table, crouched down to investigate her face. "Do I need to fetch the doc?" Tessa shook her head. "I'm fine, I'll be fine." Embarrassment curled through her as she realized that he'd witnessed her coming undone. All the work she'd done to present this image of being a forthright and capable woman had been destroyed. He'd probably heard her pleading as she'd groveled in the earth. Had she mentioned Medlock's name? She couldn't recall. She tried to gauge his knowledge from his expression, but could see that it was carefully shuttered. Instead, his steady, calm green gaze rested on hers. "I know you'll be fine," he murmured and touched a hand to hers. "You're made of strong stuff." She blinked in surprise at the compliment. "Thank you, Campbell." A lazy smile tipped up the corner of his mouth. Whatever he was about to say next was interrupted as Della came barreling into the kitchen. She took in the busted back door, her angry boss, and a disheveled and tearful Tessa. "Guests are just fine, Mr. Drake. I checked them all in and settled them, just as you said to." She crossed to the stove and fired up the heat, placed a pan on, and added some milk. "I shall draw Miss Tessa a bath after I make her a cup of tea. Maybe you could get that door to close properly in case we get any unwanted critters in here overnight." She gave a pointed look at the splintered frame. Campbell glanced over his shoulder, appreciative of the old cook's practical outlook instead of hysteria at seeing her two bosses in such a state. "I'll see to it. But I'm gonna pop and see the sheriff first." He patted Tessa's hand again. "I won't be gone long." Tessa watched him stalk through the back door, heard his steps as they headed back out into the night. She sighed. Della clattered about in the kitchen as she made them both a hot drink, then sat across the table from her. Tessa looked at the steaming mug and nodded her thanks. She was suddenly exhausted and cold. She reached for the cup and held it to her, trying to pull the heat from the liquid into her core. Took a sip and looked at Della, who'd yet to move from her contemplation of her. "I'm fine," Tessa told her. Della lifted a shoulder. "I didn't ask." The gruff response pulled a reluctant smile from Tessa. Their cook had proven to be invaluable, pragmatic and capable, probably from raising a whole gaggle of children. "The tea is good. Drink it up. It'll soothe that shaking." Tessa lifted a trembling hand and made a fist to try and stem it. She jolted as footsteps sounded outside the door, settled herself as Campbell paused in the doorway to inspect the damage, moving the door back and forth. He looked across to her, his hand on the door. "Sheriff will be by in the morning. He's headed out now to try and locate him. Might want to get those knuckles looked at too." Della commented as she stood, dipping her head to the bloodied hand that clamped the door. "I'll get that bath started, and then I'll take a look." Cam snatched his hand back as he looked at Tessa. I don't have a weak stomach when it comes to things like that," she replied in a droll tone. Cheese. The times when she had to try and repair her broken skin or cover bruises flashed through her mind. "Let me take a look. It's okay." He put his hand behind his back. "It's just a scratch." Tessa stood and pointed to the seat that Della had vacated. "Sit. It helps when I have something to concentrate on." She took down a bowl, added some hot water and some salt to it, pulled a towel from the pile of clean linen, and turned to see that he hadn't moved. She cocked a brow at him and gave him a look until he sat down. "You sure recover from a shock quickly," he muttered. He crossed and sat at the table. "Practice." She tore the towel into strips. Having the practical task to focus on helped calm her, the same way as clearing up the broken debris that normally followed Medlock's tantrums did. She ignored his pointed look as she dipped the towel into the bowl. He hissed out a breath as she placed the rag on his broken skin. "Sorry," she murmured. "The salt helps clean the blood off and to heal it. But it burns." Cam watched her. "How do you know this?" Tessa met his gaze and gave him a small smile. "Thank you for being there tonight." He lifted a brow at the subject's sidestep. He swallowed with an audible click as his mouth dropped to hers. The air almost seemed to vibrate between them. Anytime. They heard Della's telltale shuffle, and the moment was gone. Tessa quickly tied a rag to his hand and then went upstairs with Della. The old woman had been right. The bath soothed her jangled nerves. Della helped dry her off, insisting that she didn't mind even as Tessa resisted the help. Later, as she lay in her bed, with the sounds of the large house settling around her, the darkness soothed her like a blanket. She sighed. Although she had not fought back tonight, Cam had been there to save her. She had someone to stand up for her, to fight in her corner. It was a strange feeling. For the first time in a long time, she felt the cradle of family. She had people around her who cared. There hadn't been lots of gushing support, but simply stoic comfort. If this is what people who weren't family could do for her, maybe she could get used to it. She closed her eyes and pictured that green gaze. Finally, she realized she felt safe. "Won't be much longer till we get some snow, I don't doubt," Alice exclaimed. Tessa turned her face to the gunmetal sky. The locals warned her of the inclement weather and the deep snow that would arrive with the wintry months. Today, she could smell rain on the air, and as the wind curled its way around her neck, she was glad of her heavier coat. She linked her arm through Alice's as they headed back from the church meeting. They'd spent some time today planning their next poetry evening, and the prayers at the end always helped to soothe Tessa's busy mind. It was one aspect that she had missed dreadfully when she had been in Pittsburgh. The combined murmurs to God gave her the resolve that everything would work out, that he had a plan, and she must wait to see what it was. "I'm not sure I'm ready for a full Montana winter. It's cold up in New York. But when they tell me about how deep the snow can get in the forest, it's hard to picture it. I'm sure I should like to see such a big city as New York at all," Alice replied, ducking her head against the wind that kicked up street debris in a gust. "Maybe you'll see it one day with Mr. Wilkes," Tessa teased. Alice blushed and began to deny it, a bit too strenuously. Fat drops of water began to fall, and they both started to run back along the street, squealing as the rain became heavier and pelted them. When the two women entered the hotel, they were still laughing. Prosody rate plus 7%. Campbell stepped out from behind the counter to meet them, his face expressionless. "Oh, Cam," Tessa breathed, as she shook her hands out, tried to brush excess water from her dress. "The heavens have just opened, and I didn't take a parasol with me." When he didn't respond, she looked at him. His passive look drew her brows. "Is everything okay?" He cleared his throat. A strange look crossed his face. "We've had an unannounced guest," he said evenly, and his eyes moved past her right shoulder. "Well, that's good." The words died in her mouth as she turned to see what had snagged his attention. Her stomach dropped to her feet as terror ripped its way through her. She was looking into the face of the man she had tried to flee, Medlock. Chapter 13. "Temperance, darling." Medlock stepped away from where he'd been stood near the fireplace, his hands linked loosely in front of him. "Thank goodness I found you. You had me quite worried." She stared motionless at him, her mouth in a silent O shape, whilst a storm raged inside her. How had he found her? She'd been careful. She'd changed her name. She'd run away to the middle of nowhere, where no one knew her. Was it the hotel? Had news got out of the hotel? But, as her thoughts clamored for attention, she missed the words that he was speaking. "Darling, are you okay?" She blinked and closed her mouth as she swallowed. She suddenly became aware that she wasn't alone. Whilst she had company, she was safe. "Medlock, She cleared her throat and tried again and said the most pressing thing that came to mind. "What are you doing here?" He smiled and stepped forward. His demeanor was one of uncertainty, and his voice was soft. "Darling, I was worried about you. When I contacted the office in Pittsburgh and finally managed to get confirmation of where you were, I got on the first train out here to see for myself." Her brows knitted together. How did he find the office? Had Beatrix cracked under his questioning? Was she safe? "Tessa, do you know him?" Alice asked, her inquisitive gaze bouncing around the room between the three adults. Tessa couldn't stop staring. "Yes, Alice." Medlock turned the charm on as he faced the young maid. He tipped an imaginary hat as he bowed slightly to her, and she giggled. "Medlock Forsythe, a pleasure to meet you. I'm Tessa's husband." Tessa didn't miss the tone on her assumed name as she tried to stifle the gasp from the maid. "Room 5 and 7 need a change, Alice. We are expecting new arrivals on the coach tomorrow. Can you call by the store and see if Mr. Wilkes has had any deliveries, too? I'm expecting some stock any day now." She knew that her tone was clipped, but didn't have the headspace to spare her feelings. Right now, she just needed to get the girl away from danger. Alice bobbed her head and left as Tessa removed her outer garments and walked into the office to hang them up even though she was quivering inside. Her mind whirled with how to play it out. She rubbed her palms down her skirt to dry them off. When she stepped back through the office, she was faced with two sets of eyes watching her. Medlock's were assured and beguiling, whereas Cam looked wired, pulled taut, and vigilant. She exchanged a brief look with him before she walked past him to face her husband. "You've caught me quite unawares, Medlock," she told him. For just an instant, she saw the facade shimmer and saw that that had been his intention. She knew that, but for the presence of Campbell, Medlock would no doubt be asserting his husbandly duties over her right now. It didn't matter how he had found her. She was trapped. She realized that it didn't matter where she ran away to. Medlock would always track her down. "Then I apologize." His veneer was back in place as he dipped his head. "I merely wanted to see for myself where my wife had absconded to, and to see that you were safe." "I'm quite safe. I can see that." She shivered as his gaze meandered over her attire. Once upon a time, that look would have ignited her skin. Now she had to swallow back on her revulsion. "I have been very worried about you, my darling." He stepped forward and she automatically retreated. She sensed rather than saw Campbell react too. Medlock kept his tone even as he spread his hands wide. "I'd like to speak to you, in private." He looked at Campbell before he added, "If that suits you, Temperance, please. I've missed you. Just hear me out." Her lips rolled inwards to buy her time. She guessed that the kind words and pleading were for Cam's benefit. She wondered what the two of them had spoken about as they'd waited for her to get back from the church meeting. Maybe Medlock wondered if they were romantically involved and that his timid approach would dispute any claim of violence she'd made against her husband. "You can use the office," Cam said, his hand indicating the room to the back. Tessa thought about the tiny, confined space and that she wouldn't have anywhere to go, but Medlock had accepted his offer and walked towards it, leaving her with no option but to follow. Her eyes sought out Campbell, who nodded imperceptibly to her as she closed the door. The leather chair creaked as Medlock sat and linked his fingers in his lap. Tessa watched him as he took in the surroundings, alighting on notes and calendars. Her note-taking littered about the place with tasks and figures jotted down on. She took courage from the fact that Campbell was on the other side of the door, and Medlock had never struck her in company. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I wasn't a good husband to you. When you run away, I was forced to take a good, hard look at myself. I wasn't kind to you, and you deserve better." She gaped at the admission. I spoke to your father, and he reminded me of what a good husband should be. She felt her eyes sting at the mention of her father. You spoke to him? Medlock nodded. I went to see if they knew where you were. They're out of their mind with worry, not knowing where you are. Of course, Beatrix knew. You took her last name. Wasn't difficult to figure it out once I spoke to the office manager in Pittsburgh. Helps that you're as pretty as you are. He recalled meeting you. She saw that veneer slip once more and knew that his words were just lip service in case Cam was at the door listening. Her parents also knew where she was, so he was lying about that too. She decided to play along for now. I didn't see a way out from our marriage, Medlock. I knew that you'd look for me at my parents'. He snuffled out a mocking laugh. It must have been bad to drive you to the backwaters of the world. This place is a dump, Temperance. She felt her hackles go up at his disregard for this lovely little town and its kind townsfolk. It's not a dump. It's hardly a sprawling metropolis, is it now? His fingers spread to encompass the space. Look, you've had your little sulk. You've made your point. It's time to come home where you belong. Tessa shook her head, the words leaving her body of their own volition. No, Medlock. That veneer cracked again, and his eyes glittered at her. She saw him fight for control of his emotions. What do you mean, no? She jutted out her chin. What I said. I like it here. I feel valued. I've done good things. May I remind you of your legal responsibilities? He ground out. As my wife, you're legally bound to me. She was lifted by her sudden bravery. I know what my legal obligations are. I have no intention of ever getting married again. But I'm not coming back with you. I was trapped and beaten. Even when you promised to love and to cherish me. He leaped to his feet and she backed against the door. She longed to shut down, to give in, to let him win. It would be easier than fighting. She was so sick of fighting, of lying, of living in fear. Instead, she stared back at him. He curled his hands into fists. You promised to obey me, and yet you still cannot do that. You're choosing this hovel over your home, or are you choosing that cowboy over me? Even if I told you there was no one else in my heart, you wouldn't believe me, she said. He dragged in a breath as he walked towards her, his nostrils flaring and his jaw bouncing like a tick. You don't fear me. I know that God has a plan for me, she replied, fortified by her faith. She was no longer scared of dying. She had reconnected with the Lord. She had made her peace with being lost in the wilderness of life. She knew that beyond this life, he was waiting for her. If that meant that she would be going to heaven today, she was ready. Medlock laughed. You don't know what I'm capable of. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers. So, don't test me. She pressed her head back to his, her own temper zinging back to life inside her. Then don't test me either, dear husband. He reared back, disbelief crossing his face. He tilted his head as he glared at her. Then he gave her a crocodilian smile that peeled back to reveal gritted teeth. Ah, you are not afraid for yourself. That's good. Maybe we'll look at things a different way. He took a step back and flicked his jacket back at the hip to reveal a black pistol strapped to his hip. What if I weren't to kill you, but your new boss in there? How about that? Chapter 14. Tessa gasped as the words sunk in. He's done nothing wrong. Medlock rocked back on his heels, delighted in her sudden defensive response. Ah, he's lured my wife here under false pretenses, and then when her husband shows up, there's a mighty fight. We already have the young maid as a witness that I was here. Picture it now. He waved his hands to eclipse the drama. Then in the struggle, there's a fire, and the hotel is damaged beyond repair. You sound like a madman. I sound like a desperate husband who's had to travel the world looking for his disobedient rat of a wife. Now you will return home to me, or I will destroy you, him and this wretched hotel, he hissed out. I'll tell the sheriff, she began, but the retort died on her lips as he slapped his hands against the door on either side of her head, pinning her in. Tell him what? You have to sleep sometime, Temperance. She looked up into his face and wondered how she could ever have believed him or in him. She felt conned by their whole marriage. He sniffed her hair, and she moved her face back from him. Come home with me, or I will destroy you and everything you hold dear. I won't quit, as I've got nothing left to lose. I will hunt you down if you run. You cannot hide from me." Tears burned their way through as Campbell's face swam in her mind's eye. She couldn't allow him to be dragged further into this mess that was her life. She had already caused him grief. It would be destroyed both emotionally and financially if he lost the hotel. She knew the account books well enough to know that he couldn't recover. She could run again. She knew that she could. Maybe she could go to her parents and ask them to harbor her, to hire a lawyer and get her out of this marriage. Surely, they would understand if she told them the truth. The gossip may bring the reputation of the hotels into disrepute, but that was something that she would just have to face. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll come back with you." She caught the look of triumph on his face as he reared back from her. He paced back and forth, like a tiger caged in the space, and she could feel the rage pulsing from him. She fumbled for the door handle. "Where are you going?" he bit out. "I need some fresh air. You are not leaving my sight until we get on that train. The stagecoach won't be here until tomorrow. We have to catch that to the nearest train station." He grinned at her. "I have a primitive-looking wagon here. Managed to bribe one of these country buffoons to bring me straight here. It will take us to the next town over, and we can stay there tonight. And then we'll go further along to meet the train. I'm keen to get you back home, you see. Dear wife." Dismay flooded her. She wouldn't even be able to say goodbye to her friends in the town. "We're leaving now?" "Yes, right now. Run along and collect your belongings. Be thankful I'm letting you do that." He dismissed her with a wave. Tessa practically fell through the door, coming face to face with Campbell, who was still stood in the center of the room where he'd been when she shut the door. Concern knitted his brows together, and he took a step towards her. "Are you all right?" "She's fine, Mr. Drake," Medlock informed him smoothly as he followed Tessa. "We will be taking our leave immediately, though. My wife would like to thank you for You're leaving?" Campbell's voice climbed up a notch as he looked at her. "What about the hotel?" Medlock took Tessa by the arm. "The hotel is not the concern of my wife any longer, Mr. Drake. Now, Temperance, take me to your rooms, darling. Let me see what this pit has to offer by way of accommodation." "Tess." Campbell tried again. "What's going on?" Tessa looked at him through her tears, longing to explain that she was doing this to save him and his hotel. "He's my husband," she said. "But this hotel, I can't run it without you." Medlock chuckled as he gave a pitiful shake of his head. "Oh dear, Mr. Drake, one might take pity on a man who looks for the guidance of a mere woman on his business decisions." Cam ignored the dig, his eyes fixed on Tessa. "Are you okay?" "She's quite fine, as she had already assured you, Mr. Drake. I suggest you place another advert in the paper, and next time, maybe ask if they're married before you take on an employee." The advert. She'd left it in her book. The flash of memory bloomed in her mind. She pulled her arm out of her husband's grip to rub absently at the skin. "I can write to you with instructions on what to do next," she explained to Campbell. "This hotel was nothing before you got here," Campbell told her. "Look at what you've done here, Tess. Look at what you can achieve." Her eyes filled with tears as she got his message. He was telling her that she had a home here, but she knew that Medlock would rip that apart if she stayed. "I know," she replied with a nod, "but we worked on this together, and now you have a team to grow and help you here. Mr. Forsythe, can I perhaps trouble you to wait a day or so whilst we do a handover? I know she's your wife, sir, but she's been instrumental in restoring the hotel. She's quite the businesswoman, despite your comments to the contrary, and I have no qualms in accepting help. Of course, she's turned your little shack around, Drake. It's in her blood. She is hotel royalty." At Campbell's look of confusion, Medlock guffawed. "Oh, I see. She didn't tell you? Maybe you weren't as close as I'd given you credit for. Well, I would take what she said and run with it. She is heir to the Hawkins hotel chain." Campbell's expression turned cool at Medlock's mockery. "You seem to be intimating that there was more than a professional relationship between us. You also seem to take delight in making glib remarks about my aptitude. If you weren't stealing away one of my staff, I would have thrown you out." Medlock's facade finally snapped as he roared at Campbell. "She's my wife. You are the thief. You're lucky I don't rip your head off where you stand." "Medlock, no, leave it," she said, and stepped between them, half pushing, half dragging him from the room and out of the hotel. "Get your hands off me," he snarled at her and shoved her towards the wagon that was waiting at the side of the road. She was hauled up into the seat, as Medlock muttered behind her, "I'm taking you home, and you will regret the day you ever decided to try and cheat on me, for as long as you live." The driver took the instructions that were barked at him and flicked his wrist. Tessa was jerked back into the seat, painfully aware that the town had ground to a stop to watch the drama unfold. She saw Campbell on his porch, but kept her gaze steadfastly in front of her. She couldn't stand to see the forlorn look on his face as she left the sanctuary of Shady Plains far behind. Chapter 15. Tessa heard the lock of the bedroom grind into place, listened to his booted heels as they walked along the passageway, clomped down the stairs. She took a moment in the silence to just breathe. She was on the floor in the corner of the room where he'd flung her. Her face throbbed from the blows that her husband had let fly as soon as the bedroom door was closed. He'd had spittle erupt from his mouth and had used the back of his hand to dry it clean. Then he'd announced that he was going to the saloon as he had a headache from all of her game playing. She pulled herself up into a sitting position and leaned her head against the cool wall. She hadn't made a sound during the wagon ride, had stood behind him as he'd checked them in. She didn't dare try and speak over the lump of emotion that seemed to be lodged in her throat. Even though Medlock kept pushing her for answers, she gleaned that he'd been to the office in Pittsburgh and claimed that she was a criminal on the run. When he'd given a visual description to the owner of the company, he'd recalled Tessa, because Nash had been his grandmother's name. She'd been to the office on the day that she had left Pittsburgh, met the company owner just one time. It had been enough for him to remember her and bring her whole plan crashing down. Tessa had believed that she would be free and clear of him after all of this time. She shook her head as she recalled her foolishly stashing the advert away. Why hadn't she burned it after she'd given Beatrix the details? Then she knew the answer. She'd been so consumed with her escape, with the fear of being found out, it hadn't even entered her mind. Medlock had told her that they weren't even returning to their house in Pittsburgh. He'd bought a new house in another part of the state. She would never see her family again. She put her hands together and bowed her head. She closed her eyes and drew solace from her faith. "Dear Lord, please give me the strength to be able to survive this. I know not what your plan is, but trust that you are testing me. Please, Lord, give me the power to keep going. I will keep my prayers to you, my Lord. And I am so happy that you were there to welcome me back into your church. I pray to you to keep watch over Campbell, Alice, Della, Bessie, Eddie, and all in Shady Plains. Keep them safe and healthy, especially Campbell. He will need your guidance now more than ever. And dear Lord, pray that you watch over Medlock. Please show him that pain and suffering is not the way to true happiness, and please forgive him for his sins and bad words against these good people. Amen." And she sat there, against the wall. She remained still as she looked through the window. She watched as twilight was followed by the darkness and could see the stars winking to life in the velvet night sky. The bright moon played peekaboo in the clouds that chased across it. Tessa sat there, her mind variegating between the life she'd had, with its longed-for freedoms, as she mentally prepared herself to return to the gilded cage of a marriage to a man who'd broken her once. She would no longer be able to enjoy being surrounded by people or using her mind daily. She had loved the buzz of being back in business that ran in her blood. She had once more had structure to her day. When she closed her eyes, the calming green of Campbell's eyes was like an anchor in the storm. She wanted to shut off the painful thought of never being able to see him again, but didn't want to ever forget him, so instead kept his face at the forefront, like picking a scab. Her mind repeated her prayers as she waited for Medlock to return. The loud knocking at the door jarred her awake. She gasped in pain as her stiff muscles protested in cramps. She was still sitting on the floor, only now the room was lit up with daylight. She put a hand to her neck to rub at the tightness there. Her whole body ached, and there was a dull throb at her temple. The bed was empty. The door rattled in the frame as it was knocked once more. Slowly, she pushed to her feet and crossed to the door. Then she remembered that Medlock had locked it. "Medlock?" she asked. "Is that you?" No, ma'am. This is Mrs. Bonner, the hotel owner." "Oh, what do you want?" "There is someone here that needs to see you." Tessa pressed her head against the door as shame washed over her. "I'm afraid that I can't open the door." Medlock would be furious. She knew the rules. Mrs. Forsythe? A male voice asked, more authoritarian this time. It's the sheriff. I need to speak with you. She sighed. I can't open the door. My husband has the key. I'm locked in. She could make out hushed whispers on the other side and then withdrawing steps. Her mind raced as to what was going on. She could have sworn Medlock paid the clerk. Her eyes swiveled to the window. Where was Medlock? What time was it? Maybe she'd slept on and they needed the room for a guest. Ma'am, Mrs. Bonner's voice again. Are you decent? I have a key here. Yes. Tessa had no other belongings other than the dress that she stood in. She moved back as she heard the key slide into the mechanism, and the lock squeaked in protest. She pulled the door open and glanced at the two people in the hallway. Too late, she remembered her tattered face as she turned from their shocked expressions. Tessa? The man asked. Sheriff Ford, what are you doing here? She recognized him from Shady Plains. His eyes moved over the damage as his brows met. They swept the room behind her. I could ask you the same thing. I thought, you're Mrs. Forsythe? Tessa nodded. I need you to come downstairs. His tone was gentle. She shook her head. I shouldn't leave. He inclined his head, his expression sympathetic. Mrs. Forsythe, would you like some tea? Come and have a warm by the fire. You look a little peaky. Tessa looked at Mrs. Bonner with a smile, and then squinted as pain shafted through her skull with the movement. She exhaled slowly. She would be safe with the sheriff in the building. Tea would be nice, she told the landlady. She followed them through the hallway and down the stairs. The hotel was more of a boarding house, with a wide-open hallway that had dark wooden furniture nestled to the walls and chairs arranged around a roaring fire in the hearth. Several doors led off from the main room, and she could hear the telltale clanging of metal through an archway that must house the kitchen. Mrs. Bonner indicated that she sit down and left to give them some privacy. Tessa took a seat on the low couch and held her hand out to pull some heat from the fire. The couch dipped as Sheriff Ford sat on the other end. My husband, she began, but words failed her. She wasn't sure how to explain away him locking her in the room or how her face must look. Sheriff Ford plopped his hat on his knee and leaned forward, his face gentle. Ma'am, Tessa, there was a quarrel last night, here in town, at the saloon. The Anders brothers. He hesitated as her puzzled gaze met his, and Mr. Forsythe. There was a card game, and apparently some insults were exchanged. The saloon owner, he's a good man. He tried to warn your husband about who he was up against. He pulled out his pistol first. The sheriff shook his head. It was a clean shot, but I'm afraid your husband, well, he was killed. Chapter 16. I'm very sorry, Tessa. She exhaled as she stared at the sheriff. The Anders brothers. I'm afraid they're long gone. I don't know which one of them it was who fired the shot. No one in the saloon will tell me which one it was. I will be following it up, making an arrest when I catch up with them, but they're quite a lawless group of men. Are you certain it was him? He carried some papers on him. Sheriff Ford scratched his brow with a thumbnail. Mr. Bonner here recognized him. He mentioned he had a wife, though I had no idea the wife was you. Tess swallowed. I'd left him. I ran away. He tracked me down yesterday and I agreed to return home. Sheriff waved a hand encompassing her face. This is the result of you agreeing to return home? He's my husband, she replied automatically, though this was probably just the preliminary act. She gave a mirthless laugh. I don't know what else to say. He's dead? The sheriff nodded. Can I do anything? Her breath caught as her mind spiraled. He was gone. She was free. What did she do now? Funeral, she thought. I must bury him. But where? He had no family. She had no idea what his plans were for a burial. It had never come up. Why would it when they were both young? Was this her fault? If she hadn't come out here in the first place, then he wouldn't have followed her here. The thought slithered its way into her heart. She swallowed. Then she remembered the reputation of the Anders brothers and the dreadful things that Medlock had said about the townsfolk. If he's even hinted at such disdain to one of the brothers, then maybe it wasn't her fault. Where could she go? The answer popped into her mind, as clear as a bell. Can you take me back to Shady Plains? Cam was in a foul mood. He'd berated both Alice and Della already, and the clock had barely struck midday. He'd studiously ignored any guests, instead choosing to barricade himself in the office, which wasn't his best plan. He could see Tessa everywhere. Her handwriting, the organization of the items on the shelf. He closed his eyes to try and stem the wave of anguish. Why hadn't he stopped her from leaving? He'd made a promise to himself to protect her, and he'd done nothing. Had she wanted to go? Was she okay now? He had no idea where she was really from, so he couldn't even write to her. Then he remembered that she was a Hawkins. Maybe he could write to her there. Though if she was the heiress to a huge chain of hotels, why would she care about a tiny backwater house like his? And so round and round, his mind went on, taunting him. He heard that wretched bell tinkle again, listened to the footfall across the floor, but couldn't hear Alice attend to the guests. Vowing to rip the bell off the roof, he yanked open the door, a scowl firmly fixed in place, and ground to a stop. Tess? His hungry gaze raked over her ravaged face, the swollen eye and the dark bruise emanating across her jaw. He could even see a faint ring of purple around her neck. His temper kicked up a gear. "Did he do that to you?" "Campbell, please," she began, and her face crumpled into tears. He rushed forward to wrap his arms around her without a second thought. His heart soared at the contact, and he held her close. He murmured to her, and met Sheriff Ford's concerned expression where he was stood behind her. "What on earth happened?" "I'll let Mrs. Forsythe explain it to you. I'll be by tomorrow. Settle her in, Cam. She's been through the ringer." Campbell nodded as the lawman strode from the room. He lifted a sobbing Tessa into his arms and held her close as he made his way into the kitchen. Della gave him a second glance after her first scowl and gasped, rushing to pull the chair out so he could sit her down. Della took one look at her face and put the pan on the stove to heat the water. Cam brushed her hair from her face. "You're safe." She lifted her tear-stained face to him, and his heart twisted in his chest. He knew he'd fallen in love with her and had spent last night chastising himself for not telling her, only to repel his words with the knowledge that she'd been married all along, and it was not right to covet another man's wife. He shook his head and focused on her, right here in front of him, right now. "I'm sorry I lied to you," she whispered. He ghosted her a smile as her words echoed his thoughts. "Just one meeting with your husband tells me why you fled, why you've been in hiding. I don't understand why you went with him yesterday, though." She reached for his hand, needing the contact. She gave him a watery smile. "He said he'd hurt you." "I can handle myself," Cam told her. "I'd already dragged you into my nightmare. I didn't want to cause you any more hurt. He said he'd burn the hotel. You have no idea what he's capable of. Where is he? How did you get away? Why did he do this to you?" "He's dead, Cam." The words sounded foreign to her, and her throat closed off with emotion. "He fought with the Anders brothers over a card game and challenged them to a pistol fight," she added by way of explanation. "I have no idea what to do next." She started to cry again. He couldn't bear to see her so upset. He gathered her close and patted her back. "Don't worry, we'll work it out together." Chapter 17. Campbell leaned against the window, a smile playing around his mouth as he looked out onto the street. Tessa was walking back towards the hotel, arm in arm with her mother. Happiness seemed to radiate from every pore, and she oozed confidence. "She looks happy." Cam turned his head. He'd not heard Garland come up behind him. "That she does, sir. Can I get you anything?" He'd been as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs when Tessa had announced that her parents were on their way after she'd sent a telegraph to them. In the following days after Medlock's shocking demise, she'd been on autopilot. Campbell had offered moral support as the locals had rallied around one of their own, lending help in organizing the funeral. Tessa had insisted on burying him in the small town where he died, and in giving him a proper funeral. She would do her best in this one final thing that she could do in the capacity of his widow. Her strength of character was just one more aspect of her that he admired. Her parents had announced their impending arrival a few days after the burial. The great Garland Hawkins here at the Drake? His mind had bobbled even as he'd expressed his concerns to Tessa. They'd been here almost a month now, and Campbell had come to enjoy their shared dinners. He could see where Tessa had her razor-sharp mind from. He'd also seen Tessa bloom in confidence under their guidance and love. Garland shook his head as he watched the pair cross the road. "You know, her letters home to us when she first got here were modest, to say the least. I know my girl felt shame over what was happening. As a father, I felt powerless to be able to stop it or to help her. I know she ran to save bringing the business into any type of disrepute. I've told her when I got here that I would give up my hotels if it meant saving her life. His voice grew rough. He paused, his gaze resting on his daughter. We could sense the change in the content of them. She wrote about you often. She holds you in high regard. She trusts you. To give someone your trust after all she's been through, that's the highest compliment I can think of, young Campbell. Cam swallowed as the words filled his heart and his mind. She'd written home about him. She'd told her family of the hotel. The words filled his happiness to the brim. Garland continued, I've been meaning to thank you for what you've done for my girl. You gave her shelter, a home, when she had nowhere else to go. Cam shook his head. She taught me much about myself and the business, and that I don't mind admitting to someone like yourself either. She's a chip off the block, sir, that's for certain. Pride glimmered in Garland's eyes and he dipped his head. Then I thank you for your kind words also. I shall be sorry to see her leave, Cam said. Why would she be leaving? Oh, I assumed that she would be returning to the city now that she has nothing to hide from. There's nothing here for her, is there? Garland hooked a brow. Son, you should get a clue someday. Cam opened his mouth as the door opened as the two women stepped through, cutting off his question. Goodness, that wind is fresh, Garland. You should see the little church. It's so pretty now it's all decorated. Petra told her husband as he took her coat and hung it up for her. Campbell copied the older man and took Tessa's coat. He exchanged a smile with her as Garland's words rolled around his mind. What had he meant? Petra crossed to the fireplace and held her hands out. This town is just a delight. She exclaimed to her daughter. I know, and if they follow up on plans to make the swing station into a base, it'll bring even more trade through here. Prosody rate, more trade equals more bookings. We could expand into next door, Papa. What do you think? Garland sent Campbell a look of I told you, as he replied. A Hawkins always likes more business, my darling, he replied. It's certainly worth a try. Does that mean you're intending on staying on here? Oh, Tessa stilled. I'd assumed that, yes. If that's okay with you both? With Campbell too? Garland pressed a kiss to her forehead, and he winked at Campbell. Anything that brings a smile to your face is worth it, my darling. At least now we'll know where you are, and we will have decent accommodation to stay at when we come and visit. I would be okay with that, Cam added, his heart pounding in his chest. Petra reached for her daughter's hands. I was hoping that you would maybe consider coming home, where I know you're safe, though. Petra, Garland's voice was a warning. Look at what she's done here. Look at what they're building. Petra nodded with a huff. Oh, Garland, I know. I can see that she's back to her old self. I'm not blind. I also know that she loves nothing more than the buzz of business. She gets it from her father. The aside was made to Campbell. If you both have finished discussing me like I'm not in the room, Tessa said, I realize I haven't had the discussion yet with my employer. Garland chuckled and pulled Petra to her feet. Come with me. Let's have a walk about the town. Let them have their chat. Tessa waited as they got dressed in coats and scarves and waved them through the door. She missed the small nod Garland gave to Campbell. When she turned back, suddenly she felt self-conscious of Campbell, almost as if the air around them was pulsing with something. He lifted his chin towards the office. Shall we? She followed him around the desk and pushed the door closed behind them. She was reminded of when she'd been in here with Medlock. The first time she'd stepped in here after he'd died. She felt the walls closing in on her, until she remembered that she'd challenged him. She pushed back at him. This was the room where she'd found her grit. Campbell was watching her carefully as a myriad of emotions crossed his face. It fascinated her when he did that. It was a refreshing change to be able to read someone. It made her feel safe. She'd always felt safe with him. There was no way she was going to leave him. What's on your mind, Cam? Mostly, that you will return to Pittsburgh. Why would you think that? He lifted a shoulder. I thought that's what your parents were doing coming here in the first place to escort you home. Then they hung around for a bit, so I figured it was to check me out, give you the chance to recuperate. I was waiting on tenterhooks for you to return home. I'm guessing you have quite the lap of luxury waiting for you, being an heiress and all," he added, as he propped a hip against the window frame. "I am pleased to hear you say that you want to stay for the hotel." His admission caused a riot of sensations through her, but she held on to the most prominent one. "Campbell, this is my home now. I love it here. I have never felt more at home than I do in this town, or here with you. I'm Tessa here." He exhaled and gave her a genuine smile. "That's good. I'm happy to hear this." She pushed through the fear that had been holding her back. She was no longer Temperance Forsythe. She had nothing to hide. No more skeletons that could wreck things for her. She needed to be brave. "I feel safe here," she whispered, "and I especially don't want to leave you." She heard his breath catch, and she held her own, her eyes roaming his face. Has she said too much? What if he didn't have the same feelings of tenderness? What if she had misread his affection? What if she was so broken by abuse that she had fooled herself into thinking their relationship was more than it was? When he stared at her, the moment stretched on, and she felt the blush crawl up her neck. "Oh no, sorry." She turned and fumbled with the door handle as mortification suffused her. "Wait." His hand closed over hers. "Please don't apologize." Her skin lit up where his hand was on her, and she toned in the narrow space. He was so close to her that she could see her reflection in that green gaze. "You don't have to," she began. He laid a finger against her lips. "You caught me by surprise, is all," he murmured. "I've imagined it so often in my head that I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me." Really? Dare she believe it? Hope radiated through her. "You're always on my mind. When you left me, I cursed myself for not having the courage to tell you before you left. Then when you came back to me, well, it didn't seem right. When you told me why you'd left with him, the threats he'd made, I understood." His hands framed her face in his as his gaze roamed hers. "I will never forget what he did to your beautiful face. It made so much sense afterward, why you were always so jumpy when you first got here. It's been a pleasure to watch you come back to life." She rested her hands on his hips and flourished with the warmth his words gave her. "You allowed me to find myself. I want to marry you, Tess. I want to show you how you should be loved and cherished and held. How much you deserve to have that. We can wait until you're ready to be wed again." As her heart soared, her mind became clear. She could see her future, here in Shady Plains. It had given her the sanctuary she'd needed to heal. Campbell had been the prize that she didn't know she had been looking for. She felt like her life had come full circle, like her life was now complete. She held no more fear, only the glimmer of optimism and promise for her future. "I don't want to wait," she said. "I love you, Campbell Drake." His eyes danced down at her, and he paused, his mouth just a hair's breadth from hers, savoring the moment before he brushed his mouth to hers. "I love you too," he breathed. She stood on tiptoe to meet him, matching hope, to be his partner, to be loved, to seal the deal. The end.